Welcome to the Cryptozoology Show with your host, the Cryptozoologist, and Merry Christmas and all that. It's about this time there, so hopefully, and we're talking about flying cryptids. Hopefully, we'll get more reports of Santa flying by, dropping off the goodies and that sort of thing. This episode here, we're going to talk about some unusual sort of things here. Bear people, the Jersey Devil, and a few another flying cryptids, and just a little bit of hodgepodge sort of things. But it's very interesting. We'll be looking at some really odd cases here, where especially in the 1800s, you get a lot of these. Where people they said that a bear carried off the child or even an adult sometimes, and yet they didn't kill them, and they're calling them a bear, but they do strange things that seemingly are not bear-like. And considering it's in the 1800s and the average individual wouldn't have had a clue about Sasquatch yet, I mean, in today's time, I'm much more suspicious of stories like this, but when they're saying in the 1800s that a bear man sort of thing attacked them, and they're calling him a bear, and even one had a club. So a bear with a club. Right. So my suspect is that because these people, the only thing that they knew was sort of a bear, right? And they see this big shaggy thing, that's what they just called it, right? But they didn't sort of like have any idea, the average sort of individual out there, even what a gorilla looked like, unless a traveling menagerie came by and they happened to pay to get the entry fee to see the gorilla, that sort of thing. And but especially in the earlier 1800s and things like this, there wasn't enough of them around, and not every city and town was visited with gorillas for everybody to know what one would look like and that sort of thing. It took many, many decades of finally hitting some of these smaller towns where the Joe Blows, or the guy, would sort of find be able to see one, right? So these kinds of things is really strange, where you have them describing them bear-like, except that they're doing more Bigfootish like sort of things, right? So and there's some really interesting ones here. First, I'm going to talk about a couple of good ones here, where these are happy endings here with this sort of a thing, where typically the child or adult wouldn't be faring well after a visit with a great big giant killer bear sort of thing, right? But in these cases, there's some nice endings to them. So, anyways, we'll go on a bit about that sort of thing, and the correlation between that and Bigfoot is really these bear people actually early tales, and or people of a actual Sasquatch instead. So let's just look at some of these. They're quite interesting. You know, we're going to go through like the kidnappings of children to adults by bear people, and it'll be interesting here. In the first case that I want to cover, this one, some people have covered this in the past and that sort of thing like this, but I think it's a pretty interesting one. And it's 1868, Ludington, Michigan, sort of a region, in the case of Katie Flynn. This interesting account, first reported in 1868, seemingly for sure was not likely a bear here. The Flynns lived in a cabin in a logging camp near Weldon Creek, and a river I fished in the 70s called the Pere Marquette River, which is the longest no dam river in Michigan, and even has a few sea lake monster like sort of sightings I've collected in old papers and things like that. I've not seen anything modern, but it could be, sort of thing. And sightings along with some good fishing for trout, especially, right? So, and a nice, beautiful river. At least it was at the time. I don't know what it looks like right at this moment, but hopefully they've kept it clean, that sort of thing like this. But Katie wanted to go with her dad in the morning heading to work, and he was bringing a calf out to pasture, and so he decided, okay, so he let her get on the back with the horse with him, and after getting out a bit, he said, yeah, I got a bunch of work here to do. You're gonna have to go home, dear, and that sort of thing like that. So he saw her, he dropped her off at the sandy sort of area there and told her to run right back and go, right? So he meandered on his way and did his work and that sort of thing like that, and finished for the day. And he gets home and he asks the wife where Katie was. And she said, "Well, I have no idea. I thought she was with you, yeah, with you, sort of thing, right?" So, so then they said, "Oh my goodness, like this." So of course, right away, Henry, hearing this, decided to go find her and look the last place he had dropped her off. So they get down there and he finds these titanic tracks and presume they were made by a giant bear. Okay, but he actually emphasizes these huge titanic tracks. Okay, so that's one thing, right? So that's not he's noticing that I'm sure a guy in an area like that would see all kinds of bears and these sorts of things, and he's stating to you that they're huge, right? So that's interesting. Okay, so then both parents looked till dawn for her and had no luck. So then they ran into a few men that wanting to buy property around there and told them about their daughter's plight, so they joined in. So they kept going and going and searching. Then finally they found this swamp area with a thick brush, and they started calling her name, and she all of a sudden replied and said she could not come because the bear would not let her. So they started going towards where they could hear her voice, and they all of a sudden they heard this big giant splash. And when they got there, this bear thing had leaped into the water and swam across the sort of creek and disappeared and went on to the other side on this bank, right, and vanished away. So finally to get to Katie, and she was on this log just standing there, right? And she was scratched up a bit, but otherwise fine. So after they rest her and that sort of thing like that, they started asking questions, and she was asked what had happened, and she said that this bear man had gave her berries. At first, she called it a dog. There's different numerous reports. This is really strange, but it seems that basically the original sort of thing is that she claimed that he was a bear, like a dog, right? And then they asked what had happened to one of her sort of items and that, and she said that the dog had ate it, right? And this sort of thing. But now here's the weird thing. She said that the dog had handed out his hand and grabbed her by the hand, and sort of they started walking hand in hand, just like you would, I don't know, take your kid or your girlfriend or something or whatever the case, like that kind of thing, like walking this sort of way, right? So then she said that at night that the creature would sort of put his arms around her and sort of and made this bed out of leaves. Okay, so we're now starting to think that a bear is going to be able to make a bed of leaves and be able to hold her hand with one paw and walk on two legs and going along. That doesn't sound very likely, right? And this sort of thing like this. So they were shocked by this, right? But there's different accounts, like because it was first reported in 1868, but then different ones over the years that were around there or knew somebody firsthand that had witnessed this had slight variations, except up to about the point where they find Katie. Just some put in other things. However, all of these were done way before the Bigfoot craze or any of this sort of thing. So they couldn't have been influenced by any of that sort of thing, right? So this is quite interesting that you have a creature going out and he's making a bed of leaves for her. He keeps her warm at night and puts his arms around her, right? And then all this time he didn't harm her, right? And this sort of thing like this. I mean, these are very strange things. And her saying that she kept calling him a dog man or something like so dog bear this kinds of thing depending on the witness here, but it's basically in this sort of range, right? So again, maybe the child didn't even know what a bear really looked like at that point or whatever, right? It's hard to know these sort of things. But the thing is that his behavior of going and collecting berries for her, right, and feeding her seems a bit out there, right, for it to be a bear, right? So I'm below zero believe that this was a bear. I have a hard time believing that some bear's going to walk around with some child for this length of time. I mean, she was gone. She was, they went all night and then all through the next sort of day you're going around and all that sort of thing like this. I mean, that's extremely hard to believe that, in this time by then that the bear didn't do something or whatever, right? And this sort of thing like this. And why is the bear making her a bed? How does a bear make a bed with like with his paws? Out of leaves and this sort of thing. I find that extremely hard to believe, right? However, a Bigfoot or wild man like sort of thing, yes, they would do such a thing, right? So that's interesting, right? So so anyways, it's one of these bizarre ones that is out there that it was a very interesting tale. Uh, and there's so many of these that they're all peculiar, right? Where the child survives for days here, and it tells you that somebody gave them wild berries. Quite often, it's always around wild berry areas, and a lot of people vanished around wild berry areas. So I don't know why all these Bigfoot researchers waste their time putting out apples and ooh 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 and hammering and with wood knocking and all this. No need for any of that. You find gigantic berry patches in a historic area where Sasquatch has been seen many times, where you have historic records of it. This is where the action is. You get cameras in there far off that can even see the creature coming in from a mile away. Like you set up traps in ways that no matter what, even if the creatures are elusive and they can tell there's a camera there and try and evade it, they're scared they can smell you or whatever. The longer that your camera is out in that wilderness away from your scent, and the more berries and all these kinds of things are reeking through there, then the more likely that they're not going to smell that, they're not going to notice that camera, and they're going to go home in on these berries, right? And that sort of thing. Like I would even, I know this sounds insane, but considering the a massive amount of kidnappings from Sasquatch like creatures reported over the ages, you might even be possible. You put some berry, you have the berry bush. You get some of these lifelike mannequins, right, and put a couple out there and have a female's voice talking away or something like that, and then the ooh, ooh, ooh creature might come out. Like I doubt Bigfoot's going to know what a robot would be like or whatever. But just the thought. But the thing is as long as it looked, you know what I mean? Like sort of like as long as there's no smell of humans here, people got to stop with this pheromone chip stuff and all this gobbledygook. There is no, we'll go by the premise that it's not a wild gorillas that escaped, although I believe some Bigfoot sightings are of that. However, we'll go by the premise that they're ancient humans in most, half of the cases, I'd say. Okay, right? Well, the problem is you're using these pheromones from other sorts of apes. You have no idea what this ape is going to like this smell or not. This is complete conjecture here, right? And that sort of thing like that. And since nobody ever gets any great films when they're putting these things out, I think it's a waste of time. However, I can tell you this much that massive amounts of native women to regular women to children have all vanished when they were berry picking. That's a key correlation, right? Of that sort of thing. B, okay, Bigfoot and bears are known to like hanging around and sort of thing. So either case, even if it's a bear man that time, you're gonna still, these things are both like berries, right? Another thing that seems to extremely work from 17th century diaries to 14th century mentionings in Europe to other countries and places all mention one thing, that wild men have went and stolen their fish barrels and smashed them open. So this is another thing, salmon or any kind of fish trapped in barrels for some reason, maybe the wood does something with the scent or whatever that this Bigfootish like sort of creatures a wild human would like, right? So keep these things in mind when you're out in these sort of things like this. These things are. It could be that instead of all this sort of unnatural things that are not there, why not key in the areas where you know for sure piles of wild berries are going to be growing soon? You get cameras in there, the berries are going to start growing and they'll start smelling stronger and reekier and everything, and they'll get rid of the camera scent there and all that sort of thing like this and start covering up all around them. You have in these different areas, bingo, you might get lucky, right? You certainly have a higher probability, it seems, in these kinds of locations than just about anywhere because the consistency for hundreds and hundreds of years of people vanishing where they were picking berries or that some wild man was said to take them off or even some that escaped and said that it was a wild man. So all of them are cooperating. It's not all just guess. Sometimes the people actually escaped the thing and that's what they were doing and they were kidnapped, right? And this sort of thing like this, like here we'll go on about this era's 1930s. This 8-year-old Lawrence Sullivan, okay, and his uncle John, they went on this trip to do some gold prospecting off road in the Sierra Nevada, and the young kid wanted young Lawrence there. He wanted to go with his uncle John. He really liked hanging out with him, that sort of thing like that. So the parents said, "Go, yeah, go ahead, do whatever, right? Have some fun," and that sort of thing like that. So the Uncle John brought him to this sort of place and he wanted to check out this area that he was going to do some gold prospecting, right? So it was hot out and all that kind of thing like that. So, and it was a bit of a trek going up there to the top of the hill. And they're way in this sort of canyon like area and it's fully off road. So he wasn't worried about, especially 1930s, about some kidnapper grabbing the kid or any of that kind of sort of things like this. So he just told him to sit in the truck and remember this is the 1930s. They weren't aware of that. The kid could get overheated, whatever, right? Like it was a different era. So people did that back in those days, right? And he was probably safer in there than out in the sun, right? And that sort of thing like that. So, but with the window down or whatever, right? So he goes up and he tracks up to the top and then he looks at Lawrence and he waves to him. Lawrence waves back and then he was just gone for he said about a few minutes, 4 or 5 minutes or a thing. It could have been longer, who knows? So but people lose track of time a little bit. But let's say like I don't know, 5, 10, 15 minutes or a thing, right? So he comes back. He sees the truck door now open and Lawrence is gone, right? So he said, "Oh no," he says, "I told him not to like this." So he wasn't panicked. He didn't think anything that somebody took him or anything like that. He just figured that he maybe the kid just was going to sneak up on him or maybe just hide and seek, who knows, like any kind of thing like that. Maybe he just decided to go for a walk, whatever, right? So that sort of thing like that. So he didn't get too panicked. So he kept looking and looking and looking and kept looking around, couldn't find, and hours went by. So he decided, he said, "Oh my goodness, it's getting nightfall here. Should I keep looking? I hate to leave my nephew out here and all that sort of thing, but at the same token, maybe it'd be better if I can get some volunteers here and that sort of thing." So he decides to do that, and he gets dogs, the police, there's volunteers, and they looked all over thinking the kid went downhill at first, right? So instead, of course, there's always this one guy, and thank goodness for the one guys there. There's always where everybody's zigging, there's somebody zagging, right? I'm typically like that myself. I'm the one that's going to go the zagging, right? I don't want to follow the rest of the crowd, right? Sort of thing like that. So in that sort of thing like this, lucky for this guy that he decided to do this, so he decides to go uphill because they had all like I mean the mountains was going up and it had tons of boulders and rocks and everything and it would be very difficult for the kid to go uphill. It's much harder and that sort of thing like that, so they figured the kid would more likely go the other way, right? Sort of thing like this. So They then decided to start keying on this sort of area because the guy found Lawrence's hat, okay, on this upper part. So they all start going in there and they're looking around, looking around, looking around, looking around. And every time they get this sort of area, these dogs, okay, would start barking stuff, but then they'd lose the scent and they couldn't find it anymore. So they started getting desperate and they decide to hire this native guide, right? So this guy brings back to around the same area where they were, but then he gets in further and further, and finally he gets up to this sort of flat cliff mountain like area. So it's like a face, one of those really hard ones where people would have to use like special equipment and hammer in to walk to climb up the wall, right? It's very flat wise. Only one of those mountain goats or something like that be able to maybe traverse something like this sort of thing, or what might have been this. So now the scent dead. There's no scent anymore. But way up, massive hundreds of feet way up in the air, there's a tiny little outcropping from the wall. So everything else is a flat, straight wall, like a giant mountain, flat, straight wall, but with this tiny little few feet wide sort of outcropping with a tree growing on it. So the guy gets his stuff or whatever, and he finally is able to get himself way up there over ages, right? And with this equipment and everything. And all of a sudden, he looks there, and there's the Lawrence. He's actually wrapped up in a booby trap with this tree bent over, wrapped all around him, seemingly designed if the kid tried to move, that it would sort of yank him and choke him, right? But at the same time, it might have been also to protect them, to wrap them up, to keep them warm. It's hard to know, but either way, the device could work for either sort of things, right? Or maybe both things it was designed for, right? But so then there was no monster there, right? So the Lawrence is alive, right? They get the kid down and this sort of thing like this. How is this possible? Okay, think about that. I mean, seriously, the kid traversed through these mountainous sort of things, goes way up, nobody can find him. Even dogs are lost in all this, and somehow you're expected to believe that a 3-year-old kid, a little kid that age, can sort of climb way up a giant mountain like that. I mean, whether it's flat and those people had to have special sorts of stuff to getting up it, right? And all this sort of thing. I mean, it's not feasible, right? But however, it would be if you were a great sort of Bigfootish like sort of thing here, and you carried him up on your shoulder and you hid him there to sort of keep him out, thinking, hearing these dogs and this sort of thing. You decide to put him there, put the trap on him, and now you climbed up further, and you must have been on the upper part where they didn't go any further, right? But you could have kept traveling hundreds of feet more. Then finally, you would have been up at the top of the mountain, and this were, I presume, this Bigfoot or whatever it was, right? So it couldn't have been a bear. It's impossible that a bear can climb up a straight wall and then make an intricate trap with a tree, right? So either some wild shaman like sort of a character here, or some kind of bizarre thing, right? That it couldn't have been a bird, right? And this sort of thing like this, because the bird likely would have harmed the kid by lifting him up there and dropping him, right? And then B, how would the bird be able to bend a tree down and make intricate knots around as sort of the kid, right? The only one could do this would be a wild human of some sort, possibly a great ape of some sort. They're fairly intelligent and that sort of thing like that. As I mentioned, one of my shows, there was an orangutan that worked to Bearrilla in Texas, and people came from all over the world to see him. He could make hundreds of kinds of drinks. He knew every denomination of every bill, U.S., British money, Chinese, Japanese money, Canadian money, and he knew exactly how much the drink cost, how to make all the drinks, and give you the correct change back. So if an orangutan could do that, I would suspect that a wild human is more intelligent than what we think they are, right? And this sort of thing like this, they catch on, right? And so it sounds very likely that in this case, that because there's no way that this kid could have traversed over this kind of sort of things like this. And this area here is also famous for the Lovelock Caves, the giants found in them, all kinds of other reports of people vanishing from there, and many Bigfootish like sort of tales as well, right? So it would add up in this sort of case where it's feasible that that might have been what the culprit was here, because I mean, it couldn't have been a bear. It couldn't have been anything. So either it was a wild human of some sort, whatever, right? That did this. But I mean, it sounds pretty hard to believe. Like even if it was some old wino or whatever, how did this guy easily get a child up on his shoulders and climb up a mountain like Godzilla like in 2 seconds and do that? I mean, it seems a bit out there, right? So some people are suspect of this story. It first appeared in David Paulides' book, and but they're claiming they can't find the original news story, but that's irrelevant. I mean, there's all kinds of news stories I found where you would never find them in a million years. That's why no other researchers ever mention them, because you even if you put in, like, let's say it was like I've seen people say, well, it must be fake because I've looked up this name Lawrence and they can't find anything. It's irrelevant. It doesn't work that way. Most of these people, when they did these archives of newspapers, like except when I was right in the library, they didn't even have it that good. You had to sort of scan through each paper and just whatever. They didn't have sort of anything like that. But when they started doing this microfiche sort of stuff and things like that, they would reference, but sadly they didn't use let's say the words dragon, right? Okay, or Fred or Barney, they don't do this every time. So like let's say unless the article says Fred and Barney, right, like as the main sort of head thing, Fred and Barney may be mentioned somewhere in the article, but you won't find this. And if you type in Fred and Barney, you're not going to find it. And this sort of thing like that. So this is one of the problems with these sorts of things here, is that sadly the way that these things were compiled, just like dragons, it like as for instance I mentioned this Mormon monk guy that his two patrons got killed by this dragon, and they shooed this dragon off and kept spearing him and everything, fighting him with him in this church, right? And this sort of thing like that. But I didn't find it this way. For some strange reason, they listed it as this other word, and it got to that, right? But I mean, if I type in dragon through their sort of thing like this, you don't sort of find it, right? And this sort of thing like this. And this is what I'm saying, that I've noticed this in newspaper articles. Like I can put in, you can put Bigfoot in, you'll find a bunch, right? But there's 10 zillion others that you haven't found because they called them at that one cave beast, or some wacky sort of thing. It has to be more like the title like thing of the paper, not the individual words that are just mixed in amongst them and this sort of thing. So sadly, these when people compiled these things the way that they did, they somebody really needs to when you search the word, like as a for instance dragon, right? They should put Drake, serpent, Draco, yeah, yeah, you know what I mean? Every known word that could have been related to a dragon, it all appears, right? This would be the way to properly do it, right? And this sort of thing like that. But sadly, that's not how they sort of a lot of these were compiled. So, but anyways, I have no problem with the story. I don't know where David Paulides found it or whatever, but it even sounds familiar to me. And I, like I said, I have many gazillion newspaper articles that they have nothing. They don't mention Bigfoot at all, or they don't even mention the word wild man. They just say strange creature was, and then when they describe him, he's 8 feet tall, covered in fur. He looks like a man. See, you wouldn't find that report. You see what I mean? Like, and that sort of thing like this. So for the skeptics out there, really, there's all kinds of these. I'm going to cover some new ones here where they're identical pretty well to this story, and these are actual real new ones where they do have this sort of proper sort of news for it, right? So if it occurred once, it could, and it's happened several times, it could have occurred then just as much, right? So I don't have a problem with the story and fully believe it 100%. So Next, other modern accounts strangely similar. Kenneth Howard vanished for 3 days, and rescuers, drones, dogs could not find him after he vanished from a home and was found 3 days later down a cliff that was in Tennessee in 2019. This kid was only like 2, 3 years of age. And the child, they presume, somehow escaped from the house and ventured to this location. Okay, so you're telling me that a kid walks all this distance, all through this sort of terrain, right? Okay, and he climbs cliffs and doesn't freeze at night. The kid was in a sort of just is almost no shirt or anything, and he didn't even have any scratches on his feet or anything like that. Come on, I mean, impossible, right? So, yeah, how does this kid climb way down this cliff like thing around this sort of thing? Like, and they find him and all this sort of thing, right? So, here's it's too weird, right? And how did the kid vanish from the thing, right? Like, how did he vanish from the house, right? Okay. Another recent one of a 3-year-old child was missing days in snow and rain and cold temperatures, and he was found sleeping by a beaver pond a mile from where he vanished 3 days earlier, right? Jude Layton shocked all rescuers. He could have handled the terrain and the temperatures. They couldn't believe it. This occurred south of Frontenac, Ontario. I'm quite familiar with the area. Fished around there quite a few times, Kingston region and all that sort of thing. And so lots of wilderness there, and we've had Bigfoot sort of sightings there. I covered some old ones of, like I said, of the Cap Devrins and all these sorts of weird ones up in these sorts of regions. Charleston Lake has had Bigfoot-like sort of sightings, as well as the sea monster, these kinds of things. So they're around. They're just not as common. But typically, it's usually just like one sort of guy that's always seen. He's always seems to be around the same sort of similar size. It's rarer in these Ontario, Quebec ones that you find families of them and stuff like that. It seems they're rogue, stray individuals that have wandered into the area or something, right? And may stay there for a while and leave. But there is locations where seemingly a bunch of them reside, like around Eagle Lake and sort of things like that. You get more reports in certain areas and that sort of thing like that. But how does a kid, like, yes, the kid was lucky. He was bundled up a little bit. He had a decent sort of little coat on him, and his shoes were still on, and he had the nice little socks and all that sort of thing. But I mean, it was raining and freezing out. It's funny that even his clothing wasn't way more drenched than what it would be, right? And that it should have been. And these kinds of things, and they find him laying right beside a beaver pond. And interestingly, like, I mean, these people searched for, I think it was like 67, 68 hours around this sort of area, and they went right. This is only a mile from where the sort of the last that he was sort of like from the area, right? So all these people, all kinds of people searched right around there, yet all of a sudden he's there, right? Now, interestingly, none of these people, the children don't give an answer as to where they were or what they did, or at least the parents don't want to mention it, right? I highly suspect that these kids would have remembered some of it, right? Because I remember things when I was 2 years of age. I'm not saying every kid's like me, that's unusual, but I mean, I know a lot of people, they don't even remember when they were 20, barely, like sort of thing, right? Which I find odd, right? But I mean, some people are like this, right? It all depends on the individuals, right? But some people have really good recollection of even when they were really small, and a lot don't, right? So I'm not sure the reasons of these sorts of things, but uh, I'm just saying, if it had happened to me, I would have been able to tell them every single detail of what sort of thing like that. So I wonder what, what's really occurred here. Like, why didn't they ask the child later, like, did you leave the house or, yeah, this sort of thing? But what if any of these kids have told these parents something that they don't want out in the news, or these kinds of things like, mommy, some big furry man carried me off out there and that sort of thing, right? I would love to. These parents, it's a shame. They should try and find out really what occurred here. Like, even if people, if they think somebody's going to laugh at them, or they think that the kid's going to have a bit of a nervous problem from it and all that sort of thing, That's, you know, if you talk about it logically with the child and say, you know, and this sort of thing like this, it might be well worth it to find out, like they might have some kind of recollection, you know, sort of thing like that. Or even if they were under hypnosis, I've heard some people can do that sort of thing like that. That might be useful, sort of thing. But whatever the case, I find all these extremely suspicious. The children vanish mysteriously. Sometimes some of these reports they even tell you that the bear man that they saw was running with the kid with one arm. I mean, come on, seriously, do you believe that a bear? The only bears, yes, you can train a bear in a circus for a few seconds to stand up and walk around, but he's not going to naturally do that for too long, right? And he's certainly not going to be able to carry a kid with him and walk miles through the wilderness and this sort of thing like this. So these skeptical answers sometimes are a bit out there. So, but these are all good sort of things where these kids came back. So that's why I decided to, you know, put them in. At least it was a bit of a miracle sort of a thing and that. But very interesting, and it makes you sure wonder. And to correlate this, correlate it even better, here's some adult sort of versions here where they're even telling you sort of now that it's this is a little bit different and this is weird, right? Okay, so here this guy's corroborating these same sorts of things. This bear people that kidnapped a hiker again, Sierra Nevada, California range. This area is notorious for this sort of thing. It has gazillions of caves down in there and all kinds of weird sort of things, right? And this is, like I said, the Lovelock Giants, which are proven, right? So, and this sort of thing like that. So they're was hundreds of years ago giants up to 11 feet tall that was living in some caves around there. So if they could have not that long ago they were alive, so there could be still some floating around, right? So this Lake Tahoe region hiker named Jason Richardson, he was 48 at the time. He was hiking up the mountain when he heard grunting. Then he just all of a sudden was knocked out and he was carried to a cave and he woke up and these two bearish looking humans grunting a primitive dialect surrounded him. They were large with red fur and furry feet and about 8 to 10 feet tall. He kept trying to do different sort of things to sort of like, yeah, you know, looking at them and was totally in shock. And he tried to get up and to escape sort of thing like this. And he realized he was bound with vines. Okay. So these creatures, again, this is human-like trait where they've now tied you up in vines, right? Showing intelligence that they have some kind of mind here, right? And this sort of thing like that. So and the guy got so scared when the creature started going towards him that he actually peed his pants. And here's the weird thing about it. He said that their necks were bare of hair, like a vulture, and their heads had red hair but seemed to have feathers in them. And he wasn't sure if they were feathers or some kind of weird sort of thing, but they looked a little bit featherish. So is this some primitive ancient native tribe that has you know what I mean, over hairy growth of some sort or this sort of thing, right? Like you got the feathers going in there. They're human. They wrap vines around you, right? Which would be like what a human would do, and that sort of thing. So apparently they didn't like when he did this, and so they decided to start. They kicked him. And then now here's the weird thing. They brought back some kind of primitive tool and then started chopping at his vines and cut it. Okay. And then they just kept staring at him and stuff like this. So he decided to keep trying to make noise and do different things to see if he could distract them. And the second that he distracted a few of them, he just decided to bolt from the cave and took off and headed back to civilization, right? So this guy absolutely bizarre. I mean, absolutely bizarre. Now, I wonder, like, if this is true, what this guy saw, right? Is it feasible that these guys, these poor guys in this cave, might have been in this particular group, suffering from that what the heck's it called again? I always get this one wrong. The one that they blame chupacabra sightings on and stuff like this, where the hair is all eaten away, mange and this sort of thing, right? So what if some kind of bug like this sort of idea where the a part of their skin now was eaten away because of this. I mean, I could believe in a cave system like that with not the best of healthy, clean water and food around and all that sort of thing. It could be that these kinds of things, some of these poor, wild people might get some of these kinds of things sometimes, different sort of sicknesses or whatever, right? So I don't know, but I mean the bottom line is that there was proven giants in caves around there, so I don't see a reason to doubt this guy's story. In a way, it's the same kinds of things, right? And it sounds very similar, except these people had a bit more snouty, like of a face, like a bear, right? And that sort of thing like that. So again, this werewolf-like phenomena where are they really actually just humans that some of these Bigfoot occasionally have funny muzzles and faces on them that make you look more like a werewolf-like sort of idea, right? And this sort of thing. Another interesting account, a wild man of France, a groom was heading to meet his fiancee in the 1800s, and his name was Bourne. He was a lumberjack. And instead, he was captured and carried miles to a cave, and a group of hairy wild people speaking and grunting like language kidnapped him. He distracted them and ran for his life and escaped. And every time it's the same thing. Even those natives that you see that are half covered in fur that I showed you in another show and that sort of thing like that, right? The same thing. The odd rare one has escaped in this sort of way where they bolted from the cave, right? A lady in Spain was captured by a wild man who forced himself on her, and she escaped having later the baby. He was fully covered in hair, had super long arms, and they called the baby in Spanish Anica, which means orangutan boy. And this was in the 1920s. Um, Another one in 1951, a Uran was killed by a posse for trying to kidnap a man's daughter. This 8-foot hairy beast in China, there, the Uran, right? He tried to run off with this guy's daughter, right? And the father, what he did is he chased in him in pursuit and grabbed a big stick and started beating him over the head while the guy was running with it, right? And so he kept hitting him, and the creature sort of screeched and dropped his daughter, right? Meanwhile, then more of the villagers came and a bunch of people, and this guy, as he was trying to run through this muck stuff that they were chasing him in, he got stuck in the wallow when he couldn't get out. So they all circled around him and started beating him to death. So it's I feel sorry for the Sasquatch guy in a way. I mean, obviously, right? They're rare enough as it is and that sort of thing. But I mean, obviously, you can't blame the guy. He's trying to steal your daughter, right? So they had to do what they had to do, right? And that sort of thing like this. But if somebody could ever track down exactly where this spot was, I really doubt that these guys would have given him any big burial or done anything. That body may be still laying there, and we could pull out a primitive human here and let's see, and then see whether the guy really is actual human. The DNA is slightly different, where there's some kind of early human, right? Or are they some kind of ape or whatever, right? So this is another good sort of story here where if somebody could get to the bottom of that sort of spot, right, and find out where this mucky area would have been, right? And with some excavation, right? You might possibly solve the riddle, right? Sort of thing like this. So, I mean, absolutely fascinating, but I mean, a very, very interesting sort of a tale. But you notice these, again, these are the same sort of thing. This is constant of this kidnapping sort of tales, right? And this has been going on for massive hundreds of years. The natives reporting it, and many cultures and many places from Spain to Africa. You had the same thing. Africans claiming that a gorilla like sort of monsters would kidnap them sometimes. And all kinds of different ones over this sort of thing, right? So it's true, it seems, that these things have occurred because we even have like the man of Morocco, the wild man of Morocco. There was a Uran guy, the same thing. They had total photographs of him. His arms, the same thing. Each time, the guy's a freak in a million, where he has arms a massively way longer than any human being on Earth, right? And each time they tell you that a wild man had raped the lady and this is a child she had. So why just doubt these people? I don't think that they care about what some scientist guy thinks or anything like this. And some of these stories are really old, right? Way before any of this sorts of knowledge of typical Bigfoot or any of these sorts of things, right? So you have to keep these things in mind that it's a very interesting sort of thing here where whether the guy looks like a regular Bigfoot or sometimes it's a bear man or whatever it is, it's always the same thing where sometimes they're just kidnapping where they don't want to seemingly harm you. They just want to, out of curiosity or this sort of thing. But then others, they seemingly do want to get harm you, right? So it's a random sort of a thing here. But anyways, it's just very interesting, but at least these ones here, even though these ones were terrible, but at least everybody survived their ordeal here, right? And that sort of thing. They weren't as better as turnout as for the kids there. They were luckier where nothing happened to them, sort of that way, right? But I mean, this poor lady in Spain, that wasn't a good go for her there, and that sort of thing like that. But anyways, again, to deny the existence of these sorts of things, I find bizarre, because I mean, again, you have actual physical evidence of them already out there in caves that were found that match the description of a Bigfoot. And these kinds of things, it all adds up, right? And this sort of thing. They're just wild humans, and some have deformities and different things like that. And because humans can live 40, 50, 60, 80, 100 years, as long as this occurs once in a blue moon, that you can keep your small little group going. All this guy has to do is get out there and jump, grab some poor lady that's missing in the woods, or a guy or whatever it is, right? Whatever they need to do to be mating, and then they sort of have a few, right? Well, now they're going to last for a certain amount, and one of them might do the same later on, right? So it's feasible that these kinds of things where you have these little groups, and most of the time maybe they're okay within their own kind, but if they run low in numbers and there's not many of them left in the region anymore, they may resort to these kinds of things, right? Or out of curiosity or other sorts of reasons, right? So Una is very fascinating, but it was next year. I just wanted to cover this interesting sort of thing about it because I just find it mind-boggling that some of the reports, like especially one that I read where this guy had an axe with him and another one with a club, but he was supposedly a bear that stole the kid. Now, how does a bear have a club with him? I mean, come on, seriously, right? So there's something to this, and again, these sound much more like a primitive humans to me, especially if they got a club with them or these kinds of things, and where they people that yeah ran away from decades previous from some village or something, or real sort of wild race of people like these giant ones, the red hair giants and this sort of thing like that. Well, whatever the case, or some with anomalies, this bear-like sort of face or weird sort of things like the guy here with the strange their necks like a vulture and this sort of thing like that. It could be from some kind of sickness or whatever. Like I said, I'd imagine it would be not the greatest of lifestyles sometimes in some of these areas, right? And that sort of thing like that. So it'd be feasible, right? So who knows? But very interesting, anyways. And so just another phenomenon out there, so that makes you wonder, right? Later on, we'll talk about a not so friendly of a guy, a Bearzilla there, and this sort of thing, and another sort of one like this where he's seemingly a bit more werewolfish. But next we'll cover the Jersey Devil. So stay tuned. So, folks, next, the Jersey Devil has had sightings over 250 years, home of the Pine Barrens, southern New Jersey, it's a huge tract of uninhabited forest that these beasts call home, right? And I was down there. I researched their old sort of archives around there and that sort of thing. Found out about this Leeds lady back in the 70s and all kinds of weird sort of ones that I picked up, including one witness, and that was it. So yeah, yeah, very interesting. Anyways, sort of thing like this, but. Uh, my belief is below zero that this is the child of the Leeds, living the 13th child, right? A sort of thing like this. We'll cover that a little bit, and these sorts of things. However, I fully believe beyond human comprehension that actually what we're dealing with here is a titanic species of unknown North American bat. And we'll cover this. It's very straightforward, actually. You can't discount 250 roughly years here, or maybe possibly even further back. It's hard to say, but 230 plus years at least in this sort of range, depending on what reference you want to look through, and these sorts of things. In the original sort of things, the Jersey Devil nowadays is all happy-go-lucky with souvenirs, and he wants to give you a kiss and all that sort of thing like that. You got the hockey team and all that sort of thing. So in order to get the the tourists and everything else like this, they make them non-scary, right? They don't want him to be getting not tourists to walk in the woods and thinking they're going to be eaten by the Jersey Devil sort of thing, right? But here's the interesting things. In the original earliest stories you can find before even the Leeds lady, you see some weird references of that there was this devil-like thing that would fly around and bust into people's homes or jump on their roofs, which we'll cover later. A modern witness that out of all the people I've ever seen in my entire life, ever as a witness, besides a handful of people that I know that I 100% sure was not lying to me because I know these people so well, right? Sort of thing like that. But uh, this lady here convinces me, even if all of this was never seen, even if there was only the one sighting by her, I would still believe there's a Jersey Devil. Okay, so here's the sort of interesting things. In the original earliest accounts, when this creature would come in, he would slice the I don't mean to be scary here, but I mean he would do things to the kids, right? And sort of kill the children and bust in and sort of yeah, that sort of thing, right? And that then the versions changed a little bit and was switching around and different things like this, and then you got this main belief that the Leeds lady, depending on which sort of story you want to listen to, either herself got peeved off because the husband was yeah, a decent fisherman. The guy liked to hunt and gardening and all these kinds of things, so he was yeah, fairly well versed here how to take care of his family. And on the this but the Leeds lady, Mrs. Leeds, she was always sort of like how do you say locked in the house all the time and depressed and all that kind of things, which happens even to some male nanny like guys or, or whatever, like what's his name, Tony Danza, that sort of scenario, right? I've seen that too, where this guy's doing all this kind of thing and their life is sort of very housewife-ish here sort of thing, right? So this lady just got tired of popping these kids out every second like this and said, and apparently it said may the 13th one be the devil sort of thing, right? But then another version, the husband had sort of, because she was so depressed and things like this, that he sort of made this sort of statement, right? So it's hard to know, but anyways, one of the two of them decided to make this statement, and then all of a sudden, this baby came out, and he had hooves and all this kind of things like this, which I find extremely hard to believe. Like it could be that at the time the child was malformed of some sort with some kind of sickness. There has been these kinds of things with people born with strange hoof-like feet, tails, and all kinds of other sorts of things, right? So even horns and stuff, and these are like 100% medical anomalies where they're not fictitious, they're 100% fact that people have grown horns out of their head before. And this what I suspect, that horns, tails, these weird things, if you become wild, right, it could be that this gene passes on easier, let's say, than typical, and that somehow your next children could look a bit weird, right? So it could be that the tale around the time of this evil Jersey Devil, right, got mixed in with this sort of thing because maybe the lady did have some malformed sort of child, right? And this sort of thing, and possibly sort of that it somehow this had occurred. I mean, some versions it says the kid looked fine at first, and then all of a sudden started turning wacko. So it's hard to know these things. I mean, one person tells the next because they're not direct witnesses, right? See, as I explained in another show, there was this ridiculous scientist in this big Loch Ness monster Bigfoot show. I can't even remember one of the two, and this guy, yeah, it was Bigfoot, and the guy tried to make this whole thing, and he looked so ridiculous by the end of the documentary that if I was him, I'd be hiding from then on, right? Because what he stated was is that when you tell a circle, a group of people at the end, and this is his explanation for Bigfoot, that they imagine and these sorts of things, and the thing changes. So his idea is that originally a person saw a goat and then at the end it's going to turn into Bigfoot, right? But how come it's tens of thousands of witnesses with identical sorts of things, right? If this was occurring, each time then the witness then would add new things. He's going to have horns, he's going to have four tails, he's going to have claws that have lightning shooting out of them or whatever, right? Like any kind of ridiculous sort of scenario. But this is not what occurs because these are direct witnesses most of the time. And even the people that are saying the third party, because the person told them so serious and they're a friend of theirs or know them or they're investigator or whatever, they're going to pay more attention to the details. So and also they know by seeing 10 million Bigfoot sort of shows, probably a lot of people by now, that even people that don't believe in it have probably caught a Bigfoot show once in their life or something, right? Or at least saw a picture of one or the Patterson film or these kinds of things. So they have a basic understanding of what the creature is supposed to look like, right? And it doesn't vary that much, right? And the only way that this could occur is that the original witnesses, right, are a sort of thing like this. Each time they're telling you identical thing, yet none of these people know each other. Now in modern times you could completely believe that 98% of these people are just spreading you a yarn, right? Because it's very feasible. They know the information. Even the most lesser people of knowing about Bigfoot have a basic idea that he's at least 6 feet tall and he's got he looks like a gorilla and this sort of thing, right? So, and he has big feet, right? So they can get the basic sort of, what I mean, sort of thing down, right? And the ridiculous wood knocking. Now every single person, well, in the 70s, out of all the sort of people I interviewed, which was over several hundred, by the time of the 80s, right, of these Bigfoot like sort of things, okay, just Bigfoot alone, not including lake monsters here and these sorts of things, and several hundred other third parties sort of where they knew had a relative or something that had happened to them and saw Bigfoot or all these kinds of things, right? Out of all of these, only one ever mentioned a whistle. Okay, and I'm actually a witness to this myself. I did hear a whistle, and back then these things weren't commonly mentioned in any sort of Bigfoot sort of stuff much, like the odd rare thing, but it wasn't really dwelled upon too much, right? And the same with the wood knocking. Not a single one of these people ever mentioned any wood knocking or anything, but now almost 90% of the reports they're wood knocking, right? Or the creatures ooh, 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 and all this kinds of things. So I'm very dubious of a lot of these in more modern times, right? Of these sorts of things because there's just too much broadcast of news and sorts of things like that to influence the sort of viewer, right? So unless a person like, but a lot of people do pass the test, like they're every little intricate detail. Either they're a real expert on these subjects and not known to be. I mean, I met one person. I mean, this person was completely, the odds of them knowing anything about any of this is about below zero. Like, because they're really country, like they don't watch TV, they don't listen to radio, and they're really old, and they saw this thing way back, like massive decades when they were younger, out in British Columbia, right? And I mean, every micro detail was extraordinary, right? And this sorts of things like that. And this person was the most straightforward, honest, like, so I just can't believe that people like this are going to waste my time for hours for what personal reason when they know I don't have a TV show, right? So I'm not going to be broadcasting them in 100 million people and this sort of thing. And all these sorts of things, it makes no common sense to me unless they actually really did believe that they're seeing something weird here, right? And the consistency of the reports, you have everything from Napoleon Bonaparte's brother actually shot at the thing, right? And there's several versions. One, apparently he shot it and missed or something, and the creature flew off. Another version, he might have nailed it, and then a ridiculous. Another third version is that the Jersey Devil stared at him. He stared back at the Jersey Devil, and then it flew away. And then he decided that he was going to catch this Jersey Devil after. So, whichever the case, the original sort of, it's hard to know. But Napoleon Bonaparte's brother saw this thing and describes it, right, with the hooves and the sort of the whole do here. So I just have a hard time believing that a person like this is going to make this up when it wasn't even barely known then. It's only a very localized sort of thing, and he's reporting this to his family and other things over in France. He was waiting to have his place built over sort of in the States, right, around Philadelphia somewhere. And he happened to be out doing hunting of some sort or whatever, and saw this crazy thing, right? So here's the things, okay? This is very interesting. The Jersey Devil's description: wings like a bat, body similar to a goat, to horse, to camel-like face sometimes, a body of a kangaroo, okay? So the guy's got like weird hooves, like similar to a goat's and that sort of thing, like this. Pointy ears like a bat, and anywhere from 2 to 10 feet tall, large wingspan. Okay, so now here's the interesting thing. That indicates to me that a fair amount of people actually only said it was like 4 or 5 feet that they saw of wingspan, or different sort of things, or the creature was only like 3, 4 feet tall, 2 feet tall, 5 feet tall, this sort of thing, right? So right away, the insanity of believing that it's the son of Satan, you know what I mean, and that he's been alive here for hundreds of years. To me, I don't believe in any of these things. I do believe there's such thing as a supernatural world out there, that there is beyond this sort of thing, because personally, I ran across a couple of weird things that I have no explanation for that are ghost-like, right? That, but I'm not interested in them. I don't personally care about them below zero, and in the sense that I feel sorry for them if they are some kind of lost spirit that needs to get somewhere or whatever, however it works, right? At the end of the day, and that's why I feel sorry for their plight, that they're lonely, ghostlying around in that. But I mean, there's no way of catching a ghost. I think all these things are ridiculous to even chase them, and there's no real nothing. No matter what you get on film, nobody is going to believe this fully, right? And that's the thing, right? See, you're always going to have a skeptical sorts of groups here and this sorts of things, and it's just not anything you can physically, tangibly catch, right? And you even have a better chance with a UFO if you kept, I don't know, if you had a missile on you and you could blast one of their small alien spaceships or probes that are coming by and maybe get lucky and knock the thing to the ground, you might be able to do. But of course, the government would take it from you in 30 seconds. This is another thing. People don't seem to get this. I guarantee you, because of the propaganda like sort of thing behind this sort of creature, right? Like anything weird, a Bigfoot, wild humans, Bigfootish like sort of things, a Jersey Devil, anything, a giant 100-foot sea monster, all this stuff, no matter what, they're going to either take it from you, they're going to circle around this sort of place, grab this, then they're going to claim later that it was made out of rubber or clay, or that it was mistaken, it was really a goat that was maldeformed, or any ridiculous explanation on this planet, because there is powers to be that do not want people to ever know that yes, there's a living dinosaur around, and these kinds of things. They hate this sort of stuff because then it goes against there's sort of all this teaching of that the earth must be millions of years old and all these sorts of things. And as I if you want to look at the documentary about Mount St. Helens, you any scientist, I challenge you to reject this of any sort. Everything you claim, the layers and all this sort of things, happen overnight at Mount St. Helens. Okay, exactly the same layering and everything. You also have, hundreds of examples of everything from spark plugs to bells locked inside of layers that are claimed to be 40 million years, 4 million years, 400,000 years, 100,000 years, 25,000 years. In fact, we'll even go on about one about a bat here, okay? Your scientists, okay, found in this one cave, the only cave on the planet that he thought that they lived in, right? And he said that they died out 250,000 years previous, right? The next day, the guy's going on another side of the cave and he finds a pile of them alive. Do you not see how ridiculous this is? Like, I mean, there is so many things to prove that that what you're stating as factual things are not. You can't prove what you're stating, right? It was just based on a theory that a bunch of people got together, or a scientist, and people tend to believe scientists are not questioning what if people actually went through. I went through old records. I have old books here from the 1960s of science that are hilarious compared to what you're stating today, right? And every year they change their sort of theories to fit in with new sorts of things. First man was around only about 10,000 years ago. Then it was 50,000, that no, 25,000. Then they changed it to 50,000. Now he's up to 25 million, right? And you have to remember that each group of new scientists, the guy has to get his theory out. He wants his paper, he wants his Pulitzer Prize, he wants this, that, and that. And when people are talking like this, right? This guy, people tend to, like, if you're a janitor, right? And the science professor, you're walking by him, and the science professor is talking about the moon or something, you're going to believe 100% of everything that he's saying, likely, because you don't understand the jargon and everything, and he sounds intelligent. But once you understand what the word, let's say, a paraphernalia means, right, or something like that, even a 4-year-old, once they get it, they understand it, right? So I mean, they're just using a lot of Latin terminologies and different things to make it all sound really highly IQ'd here. But I mean, really, it's not. At the end of the day, it's just you're using Latin words. You're subcategorizing animals by family members and all these things. And many of these things are theoretical. They're not actually proven, right? So you have to understand these sorts of things, that even if you believe in the millions of years old dinosaurs sort of things, it's very feasible that, again, that creatures that supposedly died out millions of years ago can still be alive, right? So the Pine Barrens is a fairly, even though it has actually a lot of nature in there that a person could survive in there, no problem. You got fish, water, you got the berries and all kinds of things growing around there and different things. So even though it's called the Pine Barrens, to me it was the creepiest forest I've ever been in my life, except one out that was around Toronto someplace that gave me the living heebies. Every time you'd walk in this place, just like there in the Pine Barrens, you don't hear a sound. Absolutely below zero, not one single bird, not anything, man. And speaking of the Jersey Devil, I saw the most titanic. I didn't know that this species even existed at the time. I had never seen one before, never caught it in any book. But I was going by this tree, And this Titanic, I mean, Titanic had over a foot long wingspan on it across, okay, and it was about, I'd say at least about, I didn't measure it down that way, so I should have probably, but I can't imagine that it was any less than about 4 or 5 inches in height, like the height going up, right, of its body, right? And I'm going by this tree and I see this Titanic thing, and I said, "Oh my God, it's some kind of like Godzilla moth, right?" Sort of thing like this. So I was tripping right out on it and a thing like this, but I didn't want to kill him or harm him, right? So, and I didn't have a camera with me or anything like that, so I just kept staring at him and things like that. When I started getting a bit closer to the sort of tree, he decided to pluck her off, right, and sort of and away he went. But the same thing, you never heard any birds, not anything. It was like as if this forest was like haunted or something. I can't explain it, but every time I'd walk in there to go to the trout stream, which was had the only life in it, right? It would give me the heebies. There was something immediately, the hair in the back of my head would just stand right up and it just creeped me out, right? So I didn't like it, and I got the same sort of vibe from this Jersey Pine Barrens area, right? And I mean, so but the thing is that the belief of this sidelight thing, this could be maybe this Leeds lady did actually exist, and you can find her sort of original cottage place. There's been people that have went there and that sort of thing like that. I laugh, some of these young kids, they get millions of views and they'll say, "We found the mystery solved, we found where the Leeds house is." It never was not known where it was, right? But they'll broadcast this like as if it's a giant mystery to get the 10 zillion viewers and to watch on something that every person, historian, and everybody else around the local area could tell you in 3 seconds, right? So I didn't go visit her place because I don't like anything weird like that. I stay away from any creepy haunted buildings. I had a couple of bad experiences when I was younger, and I just don't. I avoid all that sort of stuff, right? I'm not interested in ghosts, ghosts, devilly goons, or any others. They can stay in another sort of. I'm only interested in physical sort of creatures here that I believe exist. And now here's the thing, people don't realize this. Bats can be endemic to only one certain cave and only one cave on the planet. They've never been found anywhere else. Okay? So if we go by this premise, it's almost unusual that in other countries, you have some like Titanic bats, like in the Philippines and things like that. Okay? Now, interestingly, the a lady I interviewed, 100% guarantee you she's telling the truth. There is every child that went in there, they all, the ones that were there was I think about 5 to 6 7 of them that actually was there at the time staring at the window. But even all the other children that it came in and also knew about it, right, sort of thing like this. And the second that this name was said, whatever the heck she called it, it was I can't, like, she was very Filipino, right? So it was hard to say, but she called it this sort of name, right? And all of the faces on these children were in utter terror and fear. I mean, you can't fake this. Okay, so I would bet almost anything in this world like that these people were telling the truth. Then, and the height of this thing can't be too exaggerated because she said that the thing was standing on the ground. He spread out his wings, okay, and he was staring. She was staring right because she said that she had like boobs, right, like some kind of puffed up chest, right? And this sort of thing like this. Now, interestingly, in the Philippines, you do have these giant sort of fruit like bats and different ones. And there's even a photograph of one that seems to be realistic. That is Titanic. I mean, you look at it compared to the people all lined up. This guy's a monster, way bigger than what's known scientifically. And if you look at a lot of these sort of creatures, they exactly have this sort of thing. Some of them actually do look like a goat or camel's face and very similar. And I suggest that it's feasible that this creature here, this strange bat, actually is evolved slightly different because he's bigger, where it's not conducive for him to be hanging upside down. He actually sort of like walks around possibly, or maybe can perch himself up on something or whatever, right? These kinds of ideas, right? Okay, but this one is saying if you look at the sort of everything about it matches consistently with titanic bats over in the Philippines. The same kind of, some of them have a long sort of face like this. I should have put in a photograph in here, but anyways, maybe because I'm going to do another sort of story here later. Maybe I'll stop it for a second and then we'll put it in just to give you an idea, and you'll see how closely that they actually match, right? So I don't have a problem that there is Titanic bat reports, everything from the Mothman like things and some of them to other sorts of places, including even here in Ontario. There's a giant bat that may live along the Rideau River system. I'm actually a witness of it. And this bat had a wingspan of about a seagull because it was flying beside seagulls, and all of them, none of them had any much, like maybe about an inch longer on each side of this titanic bat. Yet all kinds of other bats were around it, and they looked like a minnow compared to this bat. But the bat's body was very actually not that big. He just had extremely wide sort of wings on him, right? And that sort of thing. Now, the first time I saw it was in the 1970s, over the exact same path, about a half a mile from this spot. And then the next time I was with a lady and this young fellow. I didn't know the kid, but he was fishing along the river there, and I was walking with this lady there, and it was getting evening, and we were fishing along, and started casting. And then all of a sudden, we saw this group of bats coming in like this, and they were flicking around all over. And then the seagulls and different birds were flying around. Then all of a sudden, this titanic bat was mixed in amongst them, and it looked exactly like the same kind of one that I'd seen in the 70s. And there has been a few stories over in the Gatineau sort of area and that sort of thing, which kind of runs like the Rideau stops and then goes into the Ottawa River and is almost like a direct pathway into the Gatineau River, right? So all these waters sort of interconnect to each other through different sort of methodologies, and it's feasible that the creature might not even live exactly around here, but this could be one of its pathways or something, right? But anyways, this bat had the typical wingspan of a fully adult sort of a seagull. Okay, so that's we big now. Now there is apparently one sort of bat that rarely visits Ontario that's similar, but they say that typically their wingspan's only about like 18 inches or so, like these kinds of ranges like this. And this thing was bigger. So either it was the same species and they can get larger in what they know of, or B, that there may be some very extremely rare sort of bat that lives around the Rideau River region and that sort of thing. But only two sightings, and fished there thousands and thousands of times, right? And walked it, two sightings in all these ages, right? Never, yeah, sort of thing. Mind you, I saw a kingfisher there once too. Where he actually attacked my plastic worm. It was hilarious. This was back in the early 70s, and I was twitching. These early creme worms and things like this, like you would do very similar, like a wacky worm like presentations or walking a dog like a Zara spook, except I had it on this particular day mostly just rigged by the head of it, and I would twitch it across the surface and wiggle it back and forth for smallmouth, right, which was unheard of back in those days. These were all like largemouth techniques considered, right? But I would catch pike and muskies in with them and different sorts of things. And this crazy, huge kingfisher, he was really fat. He came from out of nowhere and went meow like this, and he bombed, dived down, and actually grabbed the plastic worm and started flying off with it. And I said, "What the heck?" Like this, and then luckily he didn't hook him in the beak or anything like this. It sort of the plastic worm kind of ripped out of his mouth when finally my line wasn't releasing any further, and he pulled up tout with it, right? Sort of thing like that. So and one time I saw a ringneck pheasant along there. There's also a mysterious, the world's smallest mustela, probably. They're typically at the maximum of about 6 inches long, and most of them are about 4 to 5 inches long. Pure black in color. They were actually supposed to be described by some scientists. He found a few of them along the riverbank, and I actually caught one in a box, right? So and it took me hours contacting scientists, got my friends to go run because back then we didn't have cell phones. So they went to a payphone booth and kept arguing with them for over 2 hours, back and forth calling them. And I said, don't let them off the line, keep bugging them, tell them, say, no, this is not a joke. We know what, because I even guessed what they were going to say. They said, hey, kids, it must be a mole you're looking at and all this sort of thing. I said, no, you idiots, like this is an actual either Mustela nivalis that is has some peculiar color variance in this region, or it's some even smaller sort of species, right? So for whatever reason, this scientist was supposed to put it in, describe it, and it was actually put in some kind of ducks Ontario duck or fishing sort of magazine of some sort, and they had this back article. I've never been able to find the article, but it is out there somewhere. And it was a free magazine that they would hand out in fishing shops and never to be heard of again. So this is weird. There's a lot of scientists that have actually discovered creatures 40, 50 years ago that still have never given it a science, like all this sort of thing to it, right? It's like lost paperwork or whatever. So if creatures like this can exist even amongst, like right in a heavily populated city and all that sort of thing like this, it's very feasible if you saw the Pine Barrens and how uninhabitable in the typical way that it is, you would believe that it'd be feasible that some kind of possible bat of some sort that maybe the wingspan's a bit exaggerated in the middle of the night and all that sort of thing like that. I mean, some of the descriptions are a bit out there, 8, 10 feet tall and that. However, one of the witnesses, I believe 100%, so, and definitely the creature was taller than her and her son, right? So they obviously can get fairly big, but I mean, how big they can get, I don't know, right? Like, I mean, 8 feet is to 10 feet isn't that much difference, right? Depending on the witness and that sort of thing. So I tend to believe that it's but it could be right, like because in the Philippines they have. So just because there's no known other North American bat that can get remotely this size does not mean that some giant storm ages ago didn't get some creature wayward and they flapped around. I mean, there's been birds that have landed here and other sorts of things, and even bat species that went to New Zealand and things like that. They flew from other places, right? And then they went there, right? So it's feasible that the same thing, some kind of creature could have landed here even ages ago that maybe not even from North America, that might have been from South America or the Philippines or some other place, right? And then there was enough of them, let's say a few of them got lost in some kind of storm or something. Now they've landed here, and then all of a sudden you start getting these stories because people see them once in a while, right? So I mean, it's hard to know, but for sure, Titanic bat species exists in other places. It's not unheard of to have bats that are endemic to only one cave or two. And there's even films of unknown species of bats that you can clearly see aren't fake or anything. There's one from China. You can find it on WikiLeaks there, Mr. Sant there, one of my heroes there. I love people that'll do stuff like that. That guy's fantastic. So he goes through all these government records and releases information that people should know about, right? And that sort of thing like this. But anyways, he has this film of this Titanic monster hammerhead like bat sort of thing like this. Now they're saying it could be a pterodactyl, but it doesn't look to me like that. It looks like some unknown species, a giant hammerheadish like bat of some sort. But it's absolutely Titanic. It's huge and way bigger. And I don't recognize the species. I tried to look through China of the ones that they had as best as I could, and I can't find anything that would match it. Right. So this is the things is that sometimes because they only belong to one cave. And of course the creatures usually come out at night and this sorts of things like that. Now here's the strange things about the Jersey Devil. Quite often there's more sightings in the winter than in the summer. So I don't really know that enough about bats to make Titanic comments on this. I would be interested to talk to bat experts here to see in other countries and places like that, do bats fly around in the middle of sort of. Now I have actually seen them out in the winter a few times. when I was out night fishing and things. But I mean, it was warm out and stuff. I don't recall ever seeing one out in a big storm. And as far as I know, they might have been chased out of a building or something and just got wayward or whatever, right? Like, I don't know if this is a typical habit of theirs, right? Because in the winter, I've almost never seen such a thing. But let's say that this creature's adapted slightly different. Maybe it's more desperate for food here in the winter and it comes out more, right? Whilst in the summer months, maybe it doesn't have to venture from its caves as much. But I don't believe that this could be an insectivore sort of a creature here. I mean, if he's 2 to 8, 10 feet tall, let's say, right, or this sort of thing, it seems unlikely that he could be eating this sort of thing. So a creature like this would be more likely into anything from rodents, gophers, groundhogs, bunny rabbits, these kinds of things. Hopefully he doesn't catch a bunny rabbit. I like bunny rabbits. But anyway, they're so cute. But the thing is that it's not likely that the creature would be eating sort of, yeah, you know what I mean, bugs of some sort, right, and this sort of thing like that. So but the Jersey Devil is an interesting cryptid that also has other explanations for it. And like I said, the most popular is his 13th child here, and the kid was supposed to be born with blonde hair, the blue eyes, all prettied up, sort of thing, a waddly sort of kid, right? And this sort of thing, and turned into the city's creature, right? But I mean, yeah, I really doubt this, right? But the Jersey people, like I said, I talked ahead. Like I said, I know this. I'm sort of like an encyclopedia on all these kinds of things. So it's hard for me to always follow with these. I tried to make this one better this time, and I've experimented with a new sort of cropping program, and I'm hoping to get this right where it doesn't do this sort of thing. I noticed there's still, even though we went through this, I actually sent this to somebody else, and we both went through this, and none of these things were here just a little bit ago. Napoleon's brothers a to a rare, yeah, it must have been rare that it was supposed to be, right? But it was rare just a while ago. So I have no idea how this occurs, right? Like, I mean, it's absolutely weird, but I can't, every time sort of, it's just because you get frustrated, you went right through them, you save them, and they should be the same, but then after it's different, right? So, but this hoop-like thing, my suggestion is that the bat at the bottom, maybe to help it through terrain of this Jersey area or whatever, has adapted some kind of like calcium-like things on their feet of some sort or whatever for some kind of walking-like thing. Now, here's an interesting photo here that is a bit out there. This guy was on a highway, and he took this picture. Now, in the guy's defense, this seems to be like, if you notice, the front face of it is actually not Jersey Devil like at all. It's not as often, quite often, they're the camelish like thing, right? But he certainly fits the bat like thing. And it's interesting there, he's got some, I don't know if they're his giant ears that are probably pressed together to maybe increase your speed, possibly. Like, I mean, this photo interests me because I can't believe that it's a guy with a kite of some sort, because it would be very difficult to, if you notice okay, if it was a kite, the string would be, the guy would have to be behind these trees on the other side somewhere, then not have the string ever hook up onto any of these sorts of things. And you can tell that if it was a kite, it couldn't have been from the other direction, it's from this direction, because you see that the wings are up on an angle, they're being pushed more back to the left, right? So if a guy had a sort of a giant string here, and let's say it was, I don't know, some kind of a monster kite of some sort, right? This sort of thing, then he would have had to go it this way, because if he was pulling the other way, these wings should have been down and more the creature shouldn't have been an angle like that. The pressure would cause you to more flatten out, like sort of like in a different sort of way, like you'd be pulling this way, right? Sort of thing like that. So not only that, the guy's on a highway and he's in his car and you can clearly see that. So I don't know what to think of this photo, right? Like, I mean, but that is a titanic bat, right, of some sort, right? So as far as I know, there maybe the males look different than the females. Maybe the females look like a regular bat more, or vice versa, right? Like I don't know these things. They're too hard to guess, right? Like in 1951, a group of teens out hiking found in the woods a corpse with a bat wings and a horse's face, and this is gross. Its face was loaded with maggots in the Pine Barrens. In 1964, a lady named Jerry Plumeri witnessed and heard the shriek of the devil, which is common more than seeing it. She had a convertible coming back from the beach through the Pine Barrens and heard this terrifying screech, then saw the creature's two red eyes in a tree. Then it flew off and sort of went away from them, right? So she was freaked out by this and never changed her story. And that I don't know if she's still around and that sort of thing like that. But I saw an old interview of her and that sort of thing like that. Very believable, nice lady. I don't see any reason to doubt her whatsoever. Like and these sorts of things like that. And I mean, here, but one of the best witnesses ever is Lori Winkleman. Okay, so and not only that, I met another Winkleman, Babe Winkleman, and one of the nicest professional fishermen I've ever met in my entire life. Unlike some that I have run across that weren't as nice and friendly and that sort of thing like that, but this fellow, I was actually going to go out fishing with him, but we couldn't. It was in the winter, and we wanted to do like an open water sort of a thing, right? And he was right into some of the techniques I was talking to him about and that sorts of things like that. And we talked for near several hours hanging out and that sort of thing like that. A really, really nice man. And so the Winklemans to me are, it's an older sort of well-known sort of family, European sort of thing here. And but this lady, out of all the witnesses I've ever seen, this one I believe the most. She was back in 2004. She was living in the Pine Barrens with her husband and kids. And in January, a huge snowstorm had hit the area, and Lori and her son went to shut off the Christmas lights. She had forgot to shut them off, so she asked her son to come out. So he's walking ahead of her there, and then all of a sudden they get the shock of their life. She stares at her son, and he looked like he was petrified, right? So she couldn't figure out. And then all of a sudden she starts looking up, and here this giant bat-like creature was on a pole, and it was staring at her son. And then it sort of like kept looking at her. She thought it was like Titanic, way bigger and taller than her son, with a huge big wingspan on it, like maybe 8, 10 feet sort of across, sort of thing like this, like a big monster sort of thing. And it kept staring at her like this, and then all of a sudden the things started coming flapping right at them, right? So they started running for their lives, and they're petrified and all this sort of thing like this, and they just barely get to the place, and all of a sudden they hear this banging on the roof, right? So the creature had landed down and actually landed on the roof, and then started leaping across it, sort of thing like this. And luckily they got in the door and shut them and that. So the husband decided to check this in the morning to see what kind of damage it had occurred and all this sort of thing like this, right? And now get a load of this. Okay, so you can clearly see them here. Now, there is no way that I saw where the tree is, right? Okay, so in order for some person to fake this, okay, you would have had to somehow, um, if you look at the slopeness of this, these guys, these animal experts came and looked at it. There's no known sort of thing, and they estimated that the creature would have had to weigh between 2 to 400 pounds. Now look at the sideways he's walking. Look at that. Okay, then he switches way over here and then goes back up this way, right? Okay, and so somebody made those prints, right? And how does a guy like, okay, so let's say even the husband, right? He would have had to put up a ladder. There's no even railing sort of things that was noted, right? He would have had to put up a ladder and somehow then leaned his body sideways with and risking himself of falling and putting on some kind of wild fake shoes here and then jumping each time without slipping and falling. You notice there's no even slipping. There's no, if you look to the rights of these sort of things, like, I mean, if I jump from that one to the next one, I guarantee you my foot would start sliding to the right here. It would start going down, yet you do not see this. The creature even has such strength and such grip that he actually is able to turn his body coming up this way, right? Okay, this lady looks to me petrified, even talking about it, right? And these wildlife experts, they got them. All kinds of people interviewed her, and nobody's calling her a liar. Not a and none of the people that investigated her, none of this. And for people to suggest that it's an owl, I mean that's ridiculous. The footprints don't remotely match an owl's, and not only that, the size of them, and owls don't weigh 2 to 400 pounds. Birds weigh very little because their bones are sort of hollowish like and everything else, right? They don't weigh as much like even a titanic bird that's super huge with a 10-foot wingspan doesn't massively weigh a ton here. Turkeys weigh a little bit more typically, and that sort of thing like this. But most birds, even ones with really big wingspans, don't. And I still say that the tree is way too far for a guy to put a ladder across this way. So he would have had to come up with the most wildest contraption where you had the ladder standing up, like some kind of poles, you climb up it. Now you got a side ladder out this way, and then somehow be able to, without, like, I mean, it sounds like a titanic amount of work here. And then also you got to create these fake footprints and all this sort of thing. I just don't believe it. I believe this lady more than any witness I've ever near seen in my entire life. I would, if not, like I said, if a single person ever saw the Jersey Devil, this lady saw something, and her son. The son doesn't even like talking about it, and you can see in his eyes he's still petrified. You can't make some of this stuff up, right? Okay, so here's another guy. He found a similar like prints. They're very similar in the same kind of way that they shoot across too. And this guy, the same thing. Not only that, her story corroborates with even 1700s, 1800s, 1900s stories, especially in 1909. There was all kinds of rashes of sightings all the way up to New York State and things like this. People for about at least a week straight were seeing it all over the place, right? It was almost like a mass hysteria thing. And many of the accounts, the creature jumped on the roof and chased them and ran across and made these like scraping like terrible sounds and these sorts of things. So here you have an independent witness guy, okay, and if you look at them, they're not really that much sort of different here. You can see that there's some kind of weird pointy like things in the front, but it's not clear enough these ones to, but at least they're similar, like, right, like in the sense of that the way the pathways go and that sort of thing like that. It's hard to know like the size of these or whatever, right? But I mean, at least you have another ones here where and also many accounts of the creature jumping on the roof, right? And that sort of thing like this. So you know, it's to state that this is all imaginary. I find absolutely not credible to me. I mean, people just can't over 200 years and this sort of thing. And a lot of people that describe this sort of thing, they had no idea of the Jersey Devil. They were tourists and different sorts of things that just happened to be in the right place at the right time, sort of weird thing, or the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on which way you want to look at it. I mean, I'd be pretty freaked out by some 10-foot bat monster staring at me. I'd be running too, man. I guarantee you that nothing would, I'd be way more scared of that, like 10 times more than I would even Sasquatch. At least Sasquatch, I think it's a primitive human. I'd hope for the best and sort of back off and sort of say, hi, Mr. Sasquatch, I don't want to bother you. I am not here to harass you. Just keep doing a moonwalk there backwards and get the hell out of there, right? Sort of thing like that. But this creature here, I don't even know. I'd be so scared, probably. I don't even know if I'd move or not, but if I saw him coming towards me, I know I would. But, anyways, the thing is that I'm envisioning that because it's dark often, because of different things, that you know what I mean. There's it's feasible that the wingspans have been a bit over exaggerated sometimes in this kinds of things, right? Even with the best of witness, they're telling you the truth, but maybe the bat wings was 7 feet wide instead of 10 or whatever, right? Like this sort of thing, or the creature was 6 feet tall instead of really 8 or 10, right? Like these things are hard to know. But the thing is that for sure, likely from so many variant accounts, that some of them are fairly big here, like, right, and that sort of thing like that. So we'll give them like 7 feet or less, sort of thing like this, right? Well, the thing is though that I do have some problems anatomically with that. You know, once the creature weighs a certain point, it's then how does the creature flying, right? Like, because I mean, a sort of thing. So these things are hard to know, right? Like, because you can hear some scientists and a guy could claim this and that, but then 10 minutes later it's disproven. Like I said, when I was a kid, every single scientist said, "Oh, there it's impossible. These giant birds can't exist." Blah, 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 like this, right? And now they found even partial skeletons of some over 80 feet long that they believe. Titanic torrents, right? And these sorts of things, 25 feet, 30 feet, these kinds of ranges, right? Different ones. And clearly, obviously, they could fly. So the scientist was completely wrong for massive decades, sort of thing like this, because obviously a creature, now you have a skeleton here. You can't now debate that. He's got Titanic wings. What do you think? He just dragged them on the ground all over the place? No, he's obviously able to fly somehow, right? So whether we think that we understand the physicalities of things of what it should or should not be, we could be wrong about these sorts of things, because just like a hummingbird, just like a bumblebee weighs way more than what a wingspan of that should be able to carry. But because the bumblebee can beat at a zillion, like this, right? It's able to cause enough sort of force where it's actually not going to fall, right? So even though it's very feasible that some kind of similar like sort of thing applies to other sorts of creatures they could have adapted this sort of thing, right? So, but anyways, it's just another sort of interesting thing out there. So next there we'll. Next, we're gonna go on about the some other flying weirdos and that sort of thing like that, and then but anyways, I just to me, because I was in the place, I saw massive historic records. You have over 2,000 sightings recorded of the Jersey Devil. I personally have over from old newspaper records and personal sort of thing. And I've also since then, I was only able to find one person at the time in the 70s, but since then I've been contacted a few times by other individuals that sort of have seen this sort of thing. And so I even my own personal records, I have quite a bit here, and it's too consistent here, right? And yeah, so people want to make it into the devil monster, all these sorts of things. I have no idea. As far as I know, yeah, maybe there was a devil ghost or whatever, right? But I don't believe that there's only one Jersey Devil. I don't believe that he's lived 200 and some years here. I find this a ridiculous in the realm of real fantasy. Now, I agree with the scientist guy when scientist guy says, people want to see Bigfoot. When they go out in the forest, they see the dark shadows amongst them. And even though none of them could have an IQ as high as myself, and that's why I'm stating this, but I know that these people they get delusional. They see the shadows and the lights, and they get scared, and they almost poop their pants, and then they run away and imagine Bigfoot, right? So, but we'll see the same sort of thing there. That I believe that these kinds of things, when it comes to that world, that yes, that's more imaginary most of the time than not. However, when you got physical sort of evidence here, and people clearly thousands or sort of several thousand plus sort of people here telling you the exact near description except for height, size, and wing properties, which you can, yeah, relegate to how dark it was, how moonlit night it was, how good the witness is, and other things. But their basic story is out there, right? And like I said, it's very feasible. I mean, the creature's coming out at night. Almost vast majority of the reports are more in the later of the evening, sort of things like this. He loves jumping on roofs and walking around and standing up in trees or on poles or this sort of thing like this, right? And he's too heavy to be a bird. He makes strange, weird footprints that are sort of out there, right? And that sort of thing like this. And so then it all adds up, right? And I mean, no matter what, like I said, Lori Winkleman there. I mean, I couldn't. I would defend her to the ends of the earth. I just, I do. Even if she told me that she changed her mind just because she couldn't handle people saying this anymore, even if all of a sudden she said, "Oh, I just made it up" or whatever, right? I still wouldn't believe that. I would still believe that she saw that. So, no matter what, because of this one witness especially, and especially these tracks here, I find this near very unfeasible that this couple is going to go through all this sort of stuff. They live in an isolated area in the Pine Barrens. There's no neighbors nearby. There's no anything. There's no reason for them to get media and police and all these kinds of things and wildlife experts and everybody else tested, and they don't have an answer there. But everybody believes them, and they even told them to carry guns with them to sort of protect their property, right? So I mean, and that's why I believe her. Look at her face. I mean, everything about her. When you listen to her, I just, it's not feasible to me that this lady's lying. so, anyways, we'll continue on there with the next part. But so to state that the Jersey Devil has no sort of yeah, I like sort of a thing to it here. I doubt this. I mean, it certainly has some credibility to it. I just think, sadly, these people mix in the devil and all these sorts of other things to it that really has nothing to do with what's actually occurring, and they're making it more supernatural and all these sorts of things. When to me it's very simple, straightforward. It's a known species of titanic bat that can still live in North America. It's feasible, or that the creature got here off course, or even possibly in ancient times, let's say the early traders here along sort of the Jersey shores, whatever, right? Like any kind of scenario here from the 1700s, Boston Harbor and all that. Maybe they came from the Philippines, as far as I know, and brought maybe somebody had a few of them as pets in a cage, as far as I know, and then they let the thing go. Like any kind of scenario be feasible, right? So I can't say it's 100% sure for sure it's a native North American bat, but I mean, all of it adds up. But there must have been a few of them at first enough to make, and the habitat that they're living in must be able to provide them pretty good hiding coverage, and they probably live in some kind of isolated caves there, or maybe a few caves or one cave or whatever, right? And this sort of thing, and that's what I believe it is. I mean, so to me, the case is sort of clear that for sure this is not a ghost. It's not a devil. It's not the Leeds devil leaping around, sort of thing like that. Although you could go down there and check it out, I'm sure it'd be very cool. I'd love to. I haven't been down in this sort of region in many moons, but the thing is, for sure, there's got to be more to it than what meets the eye. It's just when you start getting physical evidence and over 2,000 sightings over, in a span of several hundred years here, it's too consistent. Not every single one of these people, and I doubt Napoleon Bonaparte's brothers going to make official sort of things to his family and all this sort of thing, mentioning this unless there was something to it. So, anyways, we'll continue on. So I wanted to show you, Sarah, one of these giant bats from the Philippines, right? So can you imagine that thing standing up, something like it, right? A different version of this, like bigger, sort of, right? And you can see the size of him. He's quite monstrous, right? could you imagine this lady there and a creature of this size? Like, even though a lot of them are fruit bats and stuff, some of these kinds out there may eat rodents or whatever, or these kinds of things. And a small, it's terrifying, but a small child could be conceived as such a thing to the creature, right? And this sort of thing like that. Now, I know a lot of you were worried in my mermaid episode there about the poor rare bat creatures behind the Parliament buildings, and Jean-Guy was out there recently. This is hilarious, and he believes that he calls it the Alolji devil, right? And he believes that this cult now is somehow either cloning them possibly or somehow having children with them of some sort. And now they're creating these three-headed ones you can see here, right? So like this is True Glow's a secret villa that he has in behind the Parliament buildings and behind this cave entrance. so so we had to put that in for a good laugh there and that sort of thing. But great photo, Jean-Guy. So I believe, yeah, I know he's out there. So, but anyways, but all kidding aside, though, there has to be something to this Jersey Devil. There really must be. I can tell you for sure in the Philippines that they actually do have some titanic bats, but there is bats much bigger than what scientifically has been accepted yet that is out there, because there's no way this lady standing there and this creature was way above all of them and it was standing. It was standing on two legs, like up standing, right? And this sort of thing like this. But because there's giant bats there, it's feasible that there's a species or two that just, yeah, is quite rare. And they rarely venture from their caving systems, whatever, right? And once in a blue moon, one of these things are photographed, filmed, or whatever. I've seen a few things where they call them different names in different areas, a swang and all kinds of different sort of things. But it's all the same kind of idea. It's just that the people in the region believe them more to be like supernaturally, like a little bit like an evil demon lady of some sort, right? But I fully believe it's a bat that has sort of weird characteristics to it and this sort of thing like this. All I know is that lady was telling the truth. So whatever she saw was titanic and way bigger than even this dude here, right? And like I said, if you switch that around and he was standing up, if you see there, sometimes this creature, he wrapped his wing on this side, right? Sort of was folded over. It could be that maybe when they're out in the light or something, like maybe if the creature is folding his wings a little bit, maybe it looks like a bumps in the front. So when the viewer in half in the dark, right, they might perceive that she has breasts, but really maybe it's just the bat closing its wings or something. Who knows? Like, I mean, it's hard to know these things. Or maybe their chest puffs out more when they're agitated or in an aggressive state of some sort or whatever, right? Like any kind of scenario like that, it'd be feasible, right? And I mean, yeah, for sure the giant bats behind the Parliament buildings exist. So, I mean, they're out there. So here we'll talk about another bizarre one here. Next, the spring-heeled jack. First reported in 1837, and the sightings went up to 1904, although there was a couple of weird ones after that that you might be able to conclude was the same sort of thing here, with rashes of sightings over the years from England all as far up to Scotland and that. He was said to often wear a cloak and some kind of strange tight skin underwear that looked like the skin oilcloth sort of thing, right? So this guy was like an early disco dude, sort of thing, with some wild thing that you would see in Vegas, with the tight sort of spandexy like suits and the sort of thing like this. So he was, just an earlier sort of version of this. And he had burning fire red eyes. And apparently this guy could leap like 20, 30 feet easy, had often claws and reports. And quite often he would shoot flames. And he was from 6 to 8 feet tall, sort of thing, typically, right? So like this, right? So, I mean, absolutely up there. You can see him here now. He's coming down to bug some ladies at some party that's going on there, sort of thing, right? So he's flying down there, right? Fascinating. There, it can't be the same guy, likely. Well, it could be, I suppose, but it doesn't sound to be. If for sure the guy seemed to be, unless he was some alien, possibly, right, or something weird like that. Sort of thing. It seems more likely that maybe whoever was doing this continued on with the entertainment by passing it on to some relative in the future, right? To do it again or something, right? Or this sort of thing. Or I don't know, or copycats or something, right? Like that sort of idea, right? The first reported in 1837, Mary Stevens was the first known victim. He leaped on her in a dark alley and started kissing her and fondling her with his claws, right? I noticed this in consistent Bigfoot accounts to even the Mothman, to all kinds of one. There's always these sort of connotations to them, right? And I wonder sometimes if, yeah, what I mean, these are lonely spinsters possibly or whatever, right? Like these kinds of things that, because there's always this romanticism a lot of times, right? Where the creature wants to be kissing and fondling and stuff. Like, I mean, it could be real in some of the events, but then in other ones, like especially that one I told you about the Camp Deborah in there or whatever it was called, Debron, or I don't know how you pronounce it. But anyways, the this lady goes to get she just go to the can and she had booze and she would hide inside of her canteen, right? Because she would service the kids with this canteen. It'd be open at certain times, and she had booze in there because they'd be screaming and yelling. I guess she'd take a sip here and there, sort of thing. And this giant Bigfoot, like hairy Herman, that she said seemed to be aroused, right? She didn't mention as why she said that he looked like a rouser, right? Like what was the reason for that, right? But I can only imagine, right? But sort of thing. But the thing is that even in these, like I mean, there's so many of these, right? Like and every time the creature's leering at her was sort of thing. But because there's so many of these actual, especially native accounts, I believe, much more, especially older ones than I don't see why some girl in the 1800s is going to make up that she was grabbed by a Bigfoot. I mean, I really, there's no purpose to this whatsoever, right? Like it wouldn't, it's not logical, right? Like in the typical sense of natives are pretty straightforward sort of thing like this, and everything they say quite often they can even show you the sort of thing. So even though you might believe, and they might even believe that there's mystical properties to the thing or whatever, that doesn't it could be. I can't say these things because, like I said, these kinds of things are non-tangible, right? But for them seeing the creature, for sure. I mean, you got sometimes some native tribes like thousands of years, others hundreds, whatever, right? Depending on how long they've lived in the region, right? And it's just totally non-feasible that, you know what I mean, that these people, and each time they tell you that they're, I'd say about 70% of the reports, the girl was picking berries somewhere. I mean, that's outrageously high amount, right? Like sort of thing like this. And every time, and including one that is the most fascinating of all, where she says that the creature rubbed mud over her eyes. Who? Come on, you're telling me some primitive native lady like in that sort of way, right? Because I mean it wasn't like back then. I mean everybody was primitive, right? More than what they are today, right? So I'm not calling her primitive because she's native. I'm just saying, yeah, she wouldn't have known like she wouldn't have been aware of the Library of Congress, let's say, or whatever, right? Like these kinds of things. So for her to state that the this Bigfoot monster rubs mud over her eyes so she can't see is extremely causing human intelligence. Plus, she supposedly had a baby with this sort of young fellow, right? So everything, every time, it's the same exact sort of thing, right? And the same with these is that each time it's very similar, right? In the sort of things like this. Now, one of the main suspects was this Marquis of Waterford, but he did die before the last sort of sightings, and there was some even after that that you could conclude even in the 60s, 70s that possibly was of the same sort of character here, right? Sort of thing. So if this was the case, it could be that the Marquis passed it on to some new wacky relative down further, right, and kept the entertainment going. But it sounds to me like very unlikely that it was a space alien. Not once in any of the accounts do you get sort of that the guy, like, yeah, he flies down and swoops down on you, but I mean, you don't really see him flying from outer space down. Nobody's mentioning a flying saucer around it or a shield or any kind of word terminology they would have used at the time, right? And these kinds of things. So it's not likely that it occurred from this sort of thing, but it could be that some kind of group out there of aristocrats, somebody with some kind of comedy like sense here, and experimenters. There was a lot of geniuses even way back in different eras, right? And these sorts of things. You got your different ones out there, right? From old ones like Socrates to whatever of more of today and this sorts of things, right? So there's always been the odd experimental guy, and especially somebody, a marquis would have lots of mucho dinero, right? So, and especially back then, you could afford even more experiments because you could pay these lurches almost for free to work for you around the clock, right? And there was no labor laws or much or these kinds of things, right? So I'd imagine these guys could just do any experiment. Who's going to question them in some kind of castle, right? So either that or possibly some kind of university like group of some sort, like some, like a skull and bonish sort of characters, like that sort of thing, where they're very secret and private. Not those guys, but I mean, this kind of idea, right? Like where you don't, they keep all their secrets pretty good, right? And this sort of thing. So these continued and continued and continued, right? Like sort of like for ages here, and always about the same thing. Some of the accounts, the guy shooting flames. Quite often, he's trying to fondle them. He leaps out, and many of them were women that he went after, right? But not always, and sort of things like this, right? So, but the thing is that to me, there sounds like there probably was something to this dude. He definitely sounded more human, right? And this sort of thing, and he wasn't furry like a Bigfoot, so he wasn't a flying bat squatch or one of those weird ones, right? So I mean, and the guy had a count like robe, right, which a marquis like sort of a character might wear, or even a university like group where they're all wearing the robes, some kind of secret group that they have or whatever, this kind of idea, right? So I could see that they got early back in those days. I mean, you did have fireworks and this kinds of things, so maybe somebody would have been in knowledge of how fireworks work, could shoot out some kind of flame at you, or maybe like some kind of little torch like device that the guy had, and maybe the him swooping down on you, like let's say, so a lot of these were reported like near buildings or back alleys or weird sort of things, and one report they said that the guy flew right over the top of this wall, right, like just like this, and he flew and he was gone, right? What if somehow, yeah, some university guys or this Marquis buddies, like his lurches, right? They would have some kind of, like, it's in the dark, you have some kind of bungee like sort of cord idea here, right? So the guy swoops down on you, gives you the scare, gives the lady a big romantic kiss, and then he flings off into the, once he pulls on the cord or something, some kind of weird thing in the dark, then they would yank him back up quickly and it makes it look like he's flying or jumping over the sort of thing, right? So I mean, it could be some kind of weird sort of thing like that, right? Like I don't know, but I mean, it just I find it interesting, anyways, and for sure that there's probably was something to it. The accounts are too long here. They're very consistent in the typical thing. I mean, not half of them aren't where all of a sudden the guy's 20 feet tall or anything. He's typically in some kind of wacky underwear like stuff underneath him if they see that part, right? And that's, I guess, because he's trying to get a moray here. Maybe he's flashing some out here, some sort, right? Sort of thing like this. And to me, it sounds very, I mean, all these gimmicks that the guy had from him swooping down, right? And any of the stuff could be explained logically with some pulley cords. I mean, there was all kinds of people that were using mannequins and puppets and stuff way back hundreds of years ago, right? So, I mean, this sort of idea might have just been extrapolated on and made it, yeah, yeah, a bit more sort of crazy of that time, right? Where to freak them out, and they always do this in the dark typically, and this sort of thing. I mean, some of the reports might have been in the day. I haven't researched every single story out there and that sort of thing. But I mean, as far as I know, most of them were more in sort of lower light conditions here, and half the time they're in some back alley or something like, yeah, Jack the Ripper sort of idea. So I mean, I could see the guy hiding behind the wall on the other side, a couple of your lurches, and the second you yank on the cord or something like this after you've scared the lady and I don't know, slapped her on the butt or something or whatever he's doing, right? Then he flings himself. He gets the signal. They fling him up. He shoots out some flames to scare them off, so they're running the other way, and they had their entertainment, right? Like that sort of idea. And then, of course, the gimmick would keep going because now you finally the guy tells one of his buddies it was him that was doing it. Now he passes it on, right? So I wouldn't be surprised it was this Marquis guy because a lot of these people were crazy. I mean, there was that woman there that killed like over some reports 400 or 500 virgins, other different reports. It all depends on who you're listening to. But I mean, and just because she believed they could keep her young, so after she'd seduce them and do all kinds of stuff to them, she'd drain them of their blood like a vampire and bathe in her, right? So I mean, she was out of her mind, right? Like, and a lot of these aristocrats, they believe that to keep the bloodline, it was better to like so. You get some weirdos mixed in and that sort of thing with different conditions, right? So I mean, any of these things are feasible, I suppose, right? But I tend to think it's even more likely that it was some kind of university like sort of thing of some sort. This would be, you would get some people from higher educated sort of things that would be going to it, parents with money and this sort of thing so they could afford all this wackiness. You would have secret cult like sort of things because they still have them today. I mean, there's all kinds of organizations that belong to universities where they don't tell you any of their sort of things, right? Like, I mean, it's all hush hush, right? So it could be the same that, yeah, this joke was discontinued on and nobody ever ratted each other out, right? Or that sort of thing like that. So, whatever the case, right? It's hard to know, but it's just another interesting mystery flying cryptid out there, right? So a thing like this. But next year, I wanted to talk about this strange Bearrilla cryptid slash werewolf like beast, Kentucky. This werewolf like cryptid is said to be 6 to 8 feet tall, typically, sometimes a bit bigger, whatever, but in this sort of range. Face like a wolf's to bears, large claws, fangs of immense size that has been attributed to killings of livestock, okay, ripping their tongues out. To a few human fatalities. Now, yeah, and I mean, the history of this is actually quite sort of old, right? And so this beast has been reported for ages. Typically, it has pointy ears, okay, and face more bearish to werewolfish and that. And in very many of the counts, it's silver colored to grayish, sort of darkish, weird in that sort of range color of hair. Earliest reports beside natives that reported it besides that and other sort of native groups in other states nearby that have a similar like sort of thing. He's like a werewolf, but they don't call him that. I forget the name of them. I can't think of it this second, but they have this weird name for them, and it's basically he seems to be a werewolf, right? Sort of idea. But besides that, this first one was known in the 1940s. A man was fishing and he actually got mugged for his fish by one and was attacked and brought to a local hospital with lacerations, right? So very strange, but the guy described it like some kind of a wolf-like creature was standing up on sort of two legs. It grabbed his sort of, ripped him off for his fish, and he tried to sort of stop, get his fish, and they had a little bit of a tussle there for a second, and the guy got lacerated up, but he was actually brought right into the local sort of hospital, right? And that sort of thing. Several hundreds accounts of cattle being found with their tongues ripped out and not eating much of the cows, like so pretty well everything's there except they ripped out the eyes, the intestines sometimes, and these tongues. Okay, so that's very strange, and they don't attack like a wolf or other sorts of creatures that normally would do these sorts like sort of things. So it's very bizarre that the creature was extremely picky on what they're doing. Right, one for a farmer heard his cattle mooing in fright in the middle of the night and came out to see a large 7 foot tall silver colored beast with a face like an odd wolf. The creature in a few seconds cleared a 6 foot fence in one jump and was gone, right? A sort of thing like this. But I mean, there's luckily his cow was sort of saved there. He came in the right sort of a nick of time, right? So poor Betsy there almost got it, right? So sort of thing like that. Could you imagine, right? Like I mean, pretty creepy. In 1981, a death of several people were found and partial remains in a trailer. One clutching gray fur in his hands. Okay, and nobody's been able to identify the fur. So this is a bit weird, right? And this stuff seemingly has disappeared now, right? The odds of you finding it is like, yeah, yeah, you know what I mean? Freedom of Information Act. Good luck with that, even. Yeah, you know, you're probably never going to see these at the light of day, right? But again, it matches the description. You got the people. They found blood on the front of the trailer. They go inside, and these people were ripped to shreds, but really strange. Like they mutilated them, but only took certain sorts of things, right? And they're like, I don't want to get into this too much, but you get the idea, right? And this sort of thing, like this, so completely different from sort of any normal sort of attacks here, right? And this thing actually ripped open the doors of this trailer and attacked and killed these people. One of them, the most fascinating sort of thing is that this girl there, this one girl, she was found. Later, like a little bit from the trailer, one of the family members, I guess, right? I don't know exactly if they were all family or not or whatever, right? But there was this female, she was still clutched to the thing, but partial parts of her things were missing, right? So she was so petrified that even after the guy ripped your nervous system and everything still held her there. And on the tree, the same thing, this silver gray sort of colored hair, right? Another one here, a bass angler fishing on Dale Hollow Lake in 1975 saw a huge upright silver wolf about 6 feet tall along the shore while he was casting and it scared the living crap out of him. So he bolted out of there, right? And that sort of thing like that. Me, I would have been terrified too, right? Because can you imagine if this thing, oh, maybe they can swim, right? And that sort of thing like that, right? But can you imagine, right? So this guy's just smallmouth fishing away, sort of thing like this, right? Looking for a world record. That's Deal Hollow Lake has the biggest smallmouth bass on the planet. I've wanted to fish this place since a kid. I mean, 11 pounds, 15 ounces. That's a smallmouth, man. That is to me more almost unbelievable than Bearrilla, right? Because I mean, I've caught in smallmouth over 8 pounds. A fair amount of early sevens to mid seven, one later 7-1, and many sixes, too many to even remember, and massive tons in the later 5 pound and mid 5.5 pound range, and these sorts of ones, right? So, but I've gotten them about as big as they can get in these sort of areas that I fish in. In Pennsylvania, I caught a giant one over 7 pounds in a small little pit with an old sort of Lindy rig like presentation and a blown up crawler. What a titanic battle. This fish kept flying all over the place. It was fantastic. I mean, this was a monster, right? Sort of thing, a really old beast in one of these old pits, right? And that sort of thing like that. So I randomly caught them here and there because I've done so much fishing that, you know, if you're in the right sort of bodies of water where they can contain fish of this size, eventually, when you're a big fish specialist, you'll run across a few more than the typical sort of people, right? But I mean, the thing is, for me, it's to I can't even imagine a 9 pound smallmouth. Yeah, like in my mind, like I mean, you know, or a 10 pound one. I mean, this would be the thrill of a lifetime to me because they just there has been these freak ones once a blue moon in Ontario and Quebec. You'll get this odd wacky report of ages ago that are some are unbelievable where they probably weren't a smallmouth at all. They probably were a drum or some other sort of thing, right? But the thing is that there has been the odd reported 10-pound monster floating around, right? Sort of thing like this. But for sure they can get up to about 9 pounds in the Ontario market. But anything over 7, you're talking elitely rare, right? They start getting rarer by the second, by the second, by the second, right? It has to have every sort of thing to create monsters, right? Sort of thing like this. But this Bearrilla thing, though, is even though to me that's a little bit sort of almost more believable, right? Because, like I said, a 10-pound plus bass is so incredible to me of a smallmouth. I mean, that would be the ultimate sort of thrill of a lifetime to me. To out of all the species, this is the most. I hunted them since the '60s and reeling in monster ones all over the place, and I've caught my a titanic share of my lifetime of huge smallmouth. But to get one that size, like 9, 10 pounds or something, would be the thrill of a lifetime, right? And this is one of the few places that still occasionally one of these dudes pop out, right? And that sort of thing like that. So, but really, he's out there, and all I know is that something busted in that place. You got unidentified fur, right? And this sorts of things. And that's really creepy, right? And this sort of thing. And everybody's telling you that it's sort of wolfish like. And the natives previous to before any of these people were around are telling you the same story. So, you got to wonder, right? So, you got consistent reports here, from at least the 1940s of white folks, sort of thing, right? And previous to that, the natives, right, of several different groups. Well, then you add it all up. It's feasible, and also that you actually have a little bit of physical evidence here, possibly if somebody could. I'm sure if it was sent to a lab, I guarantee you they're going to say it's a chipmunk or any ridiculous thing because they don't want to get involved with these sorts of things, right? Like I told you, I don't believe a lot of times some of the stuff that is sent in. I think there's some kind of weird conspiracy to this sort of thing. It's very feasible because when you have people that find thylacine hairs, they match 100% of museum records. And each time when you send in a real thylacine hair from a museum and you send in ones that are matching it, right? And each time they tell you it's a squirrel or a moose or anything else, well, then there's got to be something up here, right? So my highly suspect is that some scientists actually can't be that fried and actually can't be that gone in the mind here that remember was just the scientists that stated they were extinct in the 30s, right? He made that statement. Nobody, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, besides that, right at that moment, from that moment on, previous to that, and from that moment on, there's been thousands of sightings, right? So why people believe one guy's statement over, thousands of witnesses here, including some of the most very reliable, like sort of citizens police, all kinds of things, mayors, and different, like, I mean, the list goes on of people of public sort of things here, right? And all kinds of different sort of ambulance people to all kinds of ones, right? And they're all telling you the same thing. And there's even a few credible sort of photographs and stuff like that if you look at the known photographs of thylacines and you compare it, the tail's exactly the same, the face and muzzle like thing is the same, the pointed ears, their gallop is the same, everything's the same. Even though they're a bit blurry and you can't 1,000,000,000% prove that they're a thylacine, both of these ones, one was in 1970s, the other one was in, what was it, 214 or something or whatever, somewhere in there. And both of these are to me incredibly credible. They're 100% they're a thylacine, right? So I don't, in the slightest discount the ability that thylacines exist not only in Tasmania still, but also in Australia and also in Papua New Guinea and possibly on the Isle of Kirrawina because I interviewed one of the natives there and he told me that there's this small stripe-like dog, right? And also a regular one that isn't doesn't have markings of stripes, but they're both very small. And also he corroborated that this Tyrannosaurus Rex like giant monster lives there, right? As so I mean, this guy corroborates, and if I if you saw this guy and how dedicated he is, he brings his kids to school 20, 25 miles and all this sort of thing every day and all this kinds of stuff that this guy has to do. He's too serious and too reliable of a witness to me to be making this stuff up. There's no reason for it. He didn't get paid for it. Nobody's doing him any favors. No, nothing. So I 100% believe this man. And it could be that some small population of thylacine that are even tinier that were stuck on this island as well may also exist in a certain thing. So no matter what, I believe personally that they exist. The sightings have been consistent every year since some guy made this big statement. And for all you critics, again, even Forrest Gallant can his slapping his own scientific group right in the face back and forth. He's collecting animals that have supposedly been extinct over 100 years. That gazillions of scientists went and none of them could find it. And this guy, because he's a bit more intellectual here, uses his mind here and realizes that when you get hundreds of reports and people keep saying the same sorts of things, and the guy understands the terrain that the creature's supposed to be in, he did his homework correct and he was able to find them, right? And skeptics and armchair citizens, right, are not doing this. They're sitting on the internet being skeptical, right? So this is the thing, right? So I mean, no matter what anybody claims, right? Like I said, even trap cameras were set out for decades before the first sort of photographs of some of these creatures have ever been got. And that was lucky because they were sitting there for ages and finally the scent of the human went away, right? Because of plants and trees and everything eventually whisked away, right? And this sort of thing. So finally the creature comes in because now it's partially covered with this sort of thing. People don't get this. They can smell this stuff for probably quite some time after, right? And like I told you in another show, these guys research for over a decade now, and 98 point some percent of any sort of ape-like species could knew that the cameras were there before there's like before they were even in the spot. They started reacting funny and that sort of thing. So it's very interesting, right? And they purposely avoided the cameras, right? So this is fascinating, right? Like so again, the same thing could be applying here that certain creatures, once they get low numbers and sort of and feel more threatened than normal, they teach upon their own sort of group here, whatever's left of them, right? That you smell humans, you hear a human, you anything, you stay away, right? And this sort of thing like this. So, well, whatever the case, Bearrilla, he might be out there, right? Sort of thing like this. And Jean-Guy says the other night after he was having a couple of big crackers there, he looked out and then through the smog and sort of thing like this, and he could have sworn that Santa Claus was flying by doing a practice over Vanier, Ontario. So for any of us that don't believe in Santa, according to Jean Guy, out there, and so don't be skeptical. Santa's out there, and he's going to be giving presents soon to all the good little boys and girls out there. So anyways, stay tuned for the next shows there. Hopefully we can get this Muskrat Lake monster on there eventually. And if you have any sightings, you can contact at cryptozoology sightings at protonmail.com. I noticed in some of my videos, for some reason, there was a space there and it wasn't supposed to be. Like I said, this program's wacky, right? But hopefully this one's going to turn out clear here. And I'm experimenting with different sorts of ways of doing this, and hopefully this one's a little bit more visually appealing. And whatever reason, a few people, I guess, got upset or something with what the third native show that I did. I don't know why. We like to have fun about Justin Trudeau. I mean, seriously, like if you've seen this guy in action, I mean, he's leaping around doing everything from Bhangra dancing to, the list is endless of the wackiness over this. So he's comedy fodder for us, right? Like I mean, sort of thing like this, and every person I've ever met or interviewed, yeah, you know what I mean, just finds some sort of like a bit out there, right? So I mean, yeah, and some of the horrendous things and our governments do, right? Like our recent thing here with this Corona stuff and all these kinds of things, right? So I mean, it's yeah, yeah, So like I mean, no offense if somebody's liberal or whatever, it's irrelevant, right? Like some of the panel that I talk to sometimes, some of them are liberal, right? And they even see this comical, right? So I mean, yeah, yeah, just I mean, we just like to have a little bit of fun because we miss the news of the world with some of their hilarious stories and just put in the odd comical thing, just lighten it up a little bit and have a bit of fun, right? So, but anyways, nobody's racist, nobody's anything. Like I said, actually my neighbor buddy here, he's a guy from Africa, one of the most nicest, wonderful people I've ever met in my entire life. 100% the most solid dude you could humanly find, and this guy would break his back just to help you out, and that sort of thing like this, that sort of thing like this. So anytime I can be helpful or service to him, I'll help him out in a billionth of a second, right? So yeah, and these kinds of things like that, like I said. So none of these things have anything to do with these kinds of things, but we just find, the way our governments run and these sort of mm, shady like deals behind the scenes and all these kinds of things that they do. You need to have a bit of, stand them out there to make sure people are aware that they're not all, pumpkin pie, right? Like politicians are politicians, right? So, and again, I mean, they may be puppeted by other sorts of more powerful people, right? Because that's how you get in power, right? Like you have to have backers, right? So if the backer says, yeah, yeah, you know what I mean, make the bat monster virus, some of them might, right? These kinds of things, right? So I mean, it's all out there, but I mean, yeah, yeah, we'll even wish him a Merry Christmas. But anyways, all kidding aside, though, seriously, like I said, to me, I just find it more sort of just sad that the state of our affairs worldwide with our war ring and all this stuff. You'd think we learned from the Second World War, the First World War, and all this sort of thing. And people just don't learn, right? They just continue repeating the same sorts of circular sort of thing. Everybody's got to be fighting, right? And this sort of thing, or they're all wanting to kill somebody because you don't agree with this religion or that, or whatever it is, right? I mean, it's so sad, right? So we need to sort of have more sort of a decent kindness to our fellow man and spread joy across the sort of world there and save these mystery animals because any one of these critics, yeah, and I'm sure there's all kinds of critics that get entertainment out of some of my shows. I wouldn't be surprised. But the thing is that the point is that if you analyze this at the end of the day, I mean, seriously, try and sort of at least, even if you're critical of these things, and yes, a lot of times it's a guy in a Bigfoot suit, and yes, many things, but if you actually analyze all the sort of the things of these, right? To insinuate again that thousands and thousands and thousands of people every single time have the same hallucination, and quite often you get physical evidence that's strange, and even ancient sort of fossilized footprints that clearly match Bigfoot, and all kinds of things out there. If you add it all up, it's not imaginary in that sense, right? Like, I mean, even if they perceive the creature taller than what they are, or smaller, or whatever it is, right? Or they made them a bigger, fatter head, or whatever they did, it's likely that in massive thousands of times, just like every animal that you were skeptical of before, from the okapi to all kinds of ones, the coelacanth and all kinds of other things out there, no scientist would believe this in the world if you told them that the coelacanth was floating around if they didn't have actually live representation of them, right? And this sort of thing like this. However, in their fossil records, this guy died out 60 million years ago, right? Like, so I mean, these things, again, you have massive cases where there's living fossils. It's very simple that there might have been way more living fossils. So let's say we'll go the millions of years again, right? There might have been many, many more living fossils even hundreds of years ago. And simply as people started taking over the lands and the things like this, they take over the stream. Now the stream is dammed. The stream doesn't pour into the lake anymore. And now the fish that used to feed the monster, it dies out. So now this rare, whatever, strange fish that lived in this ecological that was trapped in this sort of area now sort of dies out, right? And this sort of thing, monsters, anything, it wouldn't matter what it is, a great snake, there was other sorts of animals, right? And any one of these could have been some kind of living representation of a dinosaur-like thing, or even a mammalian thing that is supposed to have died out millions of years ago, like Laotian rock rats and all these kinds of ones, right? And these kinds of things. So the bottom line is that even if you're skeptical of all these kinds of things, there is consistently, even 217 new orangutan species, all this giant trees. They say we've been around for 25 million years, right? And these trees have supposedly died out 28 million years ago, yet they're living perfectly fine standing there, right? But again, you believe this weird dating stuff, right? And this sort of thing. But the thing is that for 25 million years, then, if this is true, mankind has always been looking for firewood. They probably, and any person that believes that man discovered fire like thousands of years later, after millions of years that it took them to finally discover the first fire. This is the most silliest thing I've ever heard of in my entire life. Immediately, if man had just, like they say, popped out of a cave, like, so let's say they came from a wombat and all of a sudden now you're this human, right? So you're in the cave. You're going to walk around, right? Just like any animal would. When you get outside, you're telling me that it doesn't rain occasionally and lightning doesn't hit something? You would have seen lightning a zillion years ago, within no matter what time in the Earth's atmosphere of ancient times to today, the lightning would have hit and started a fire. Then the guy is running away from the fire. Now he's trapped up in a mountain, let's say, and he's lucky the smoke isn't getting him that much. He realizes, hey, man, it's kind of nicer, warmer up here. If I get too close to it, it hurts me. But if I stay a certain distance, it's not bad. Hey, this stuff is useful. I wonder how this started, right? Like, you see what I mean? Like, you would figure this out. Like, even the most a chimp could do this, right? Sort of thing. So the bottom line with this, seriously, is that it's not feasible that every single time from thousands of years ago that people make up the same story every single time. In massive cultures all over the place, it's much more likely we simply have small groups of wild humans that, however their existence started from the flood to, they were thrown out of village because they were freaks. Whatever their origin, at the bottom of the day, is somehow they exist out there, right? And there's little groups of these sorts of things, and they hide out in sort of caves like this, and it's very straightforward. Again, we have physical evidence in Arizona. We have physical evidence in Ecuador of only hundreds of year old giant ladies that were furry here, and Bigfootish, like sort of ones where they're 6 to 9 feet tall here, 100% matching your troll Bigfoot stories that they have around there. We need to get with the reality here. Bigfoot is real. And if you don't believe in Santa Claus, he's real too, because I guarantee you, if you're a good little boy and girl, he's going to be out there. So, anyways, it's one of those things. But hopefully you enjoyed this and sort of thing like this. And again, if you have any sightings, certainly love to hear them. And Merry Christmas to everybody, and hopefully you have a Happy New Year. And we'll get next year the muskrat monster film. There's got to be somebody with a VCR that I know, and that sort of thing like that. And we'll talk about the interesting case of some monkey people and that sort of thing, all the way from Illinois to way up in Alaska sort of region. And I'll give you an interesting sort of thing that very few people know, where to me the story even seems more believable, because this actually can occur in real humans and this sort of thing like that. So we'll discuss more about that in the next show. And also, I'm about finished the first part of my fishing documentary there. I haven't had time to sort of do all this sort of things like that. So maybe on the next show, we'll give you a link to the channel, and you can watch away and that sort of thing like this. And no disrespect, like I said, I was talking about many of my historic things from way back in the day, but these are actually all authentic things, and appeared in newspapers and on films where you actually, the things we're discussing is previous previous to when these things were first put in print, right? And these sorts of things like that. So it's just because I fish like 16, 18 hours a day, live right beside the water, and had over 100 species available to me and three bodies of water that I could get to weekdays. And on the weekends, I'd travel every single weekend to some other sort of place, going to some lake somewhere, and this sorts of things. Well, this is why I got bored, and I would, after 2 hours of whipping a crankbait, I now cast a buzzbait, whatever was available. And I was a charming young kid, and I was able to buy in garage sales and through my wins and 5 million things. I'd be able to get deals with people and get them to sell me the fishing equipment way less than typical, right? So I was able to, even as a young kid here, I already had all kinds of musky reels and all kinds of higher end sorts of things here, and continued on doing so, right? So I definitely am one of a kind in the industry in that sort of way, like this. I'm going to cover everything from all kinds of structural, like sorts of teachings, to methodologies to get you from a non-professional angler to ready to fish some tournaments, just by simply, yeah, and even if you don't want to fish tournaments, but you just want to improve your angling and that sort of thing like that, you'll enjoy these. Like I said, I'm not a world-class filmer here, but we got some amazing things on film, even giant bass attacking other bass, and all kinds of sort of things, muskies and all kinds of cool things. So anyways, stay tuned for that, and hopefully you've enjoyed the show, and have a Merry Christmas, and take care. And it was nice doing this. I enjoy doing these shows, entertaining, and that sort of thing. And I like educating out there these sort of different sort of viewpoints, right? It's not all just, like I said, I'm a very well-read sort of person, and all across this sort of thing. So I look at the scientific spectrum to the regular, right? And yes, there's lots of great things of science, and I billion% are thankful for scientists for all kinds of things. Without them, a lot of animals wouldn't be protected now because they know more about them, and all kinds of things like that. But a lot of it, again, is theoretical, and when you're stating things are fact, when you can't really prove them, this is, So anyways, stay tuned, and take care, and hope you have a nice Merry Christmas. Bye for now.